high desert of Boulder, Colorado, a mutant nexus at the base of the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, about a mile above the sea level portion of the Babylon Matrix, where we are nestled just beneath the beautiful Flatiron Mountains. This is Jonathan Zapp of ZappOracle.com and Reality Sandwich, and welcome to the podcast, YouTube of Dispatches from the Trumpocalypse, the complete writings, at least as of now, by Jonathan Zapp about the Trumpocalypse. And today is December 19th of 2017, one of the longest years in memory. And a couple of disclaimers: I'm not recording this in a sound studio. Couldn't even get GarageBand going this morning, so it's going to be very raw, unedited audio. Just recording on a digital audio recorder with built-in microphones. And you'll probably hear the sounds of a household waking up around me. I usually start work pre-dawn. And if you hear any crickets in the background and wondering why they're crickets on December 19th, they are synthetic. It's something I keep on in my study to keep me calm during the Trumpocalypse. And it's also part of the theme, I guess, that the Trumpocalypse has some elements of simulated reality about it. And I basically began writing about, well, I don't know why I said basically. I began writing about the Trumpocalypse way back in 2015, which almost seems an era hard to remember. And, but even though I was writing from the point of view of desperately trying to get people to vote in a way that would prevent it from happening, there's just something that seems every day that goes by more fatefully inevitable about the election of Trump. Even back in 2 years ago, 2015, when I wrote my first article, and Donald Trump just seemed more like a glimmer in the devil's eye or some distant unlucky star that we hoped would never get very far and all that kind of thing. Somehow, it seems like it was a cosmic joke that had to play out. And just a few days ago, I read Whitley Strieber's book that came out just a few days ago, called The Afterlife Revolution. A lot of it having to do with dialogue with his late wife, Anne Strieber, who died in 2015, just before the whole Trumpocalypse debacle started to happen, or the campaign, was just getting going, and so forth. And she, they talked about how time looks from the other side, and that some things in the future, according to Anne, are structured and others are unformed, giving us some space for free will, I guess. And one of the things, though, that she said was formed was that Donald Trump would be president. And Whitley Strieber reacted in total disbelief, because that seemed highly unlikely at the time. He's just like, "Are you sure about that?" And she said she was. And then he asked, well, what's he going to do? And she said, "Not much." And I hope that that's accurate prophecy. I hope she's not missing some detail like a nuclear war with North Korea or something like that. Legislatively, we know he's not done much, if anything, though the tax bill looks like, this horrible tax bill looks like it may pass soon. And we know that his executive orders have done great damage, strip mining Escalante Park and all kinds of other things that have damaged the reputation of this country in the world, and on. But not much seems like a reassuring prophecy. And let's hope that we muddle through. Let's hope that it is the worst reality show of all time, but that eventually, or sooner than later, it'll get canceled by Bob Mueller, or something will happen, and we'll have moved on. And let me start with my first article, which is called Trump's Amazing Freudian Slip. And I think this is what got me started writing about Trump long before he was the nominee. was hearing him speak on Meet the Press and hearing this unbelievable Freudian slip, and then finding out when I looked online that nobody else seemed to have noticed this, which was staggering. So it kind of like provoked me into, am I the only one seeing this? And feeling like I had to write about my own perceptions of what was going on. The unconscious can talk right past our ego and persona, sometimes to perfectly contradict what our false personality is saying. Freud wrote about this in 1900, and such moments came to be called Freudian slips. If you watch last week's Meet the Press, this was the one from November 29th, 2015. Okay, well, that makes it almost exactly 2 years ago, because that meant I would have been writing in December of 2015. And you listen carefully, move the slider to 12 minutes and 30 seconds in, you will hear Donald Trump say, I really have no opinion. I just know that I'm weak, that I'm winning by a lot. I really have no opinion, but I know that I'm winning by a lot. You will hear him catch himself, a moment in which he is clearly startled when he realizes that he said weak, and then he overcompensates, as usual, with another of his winner phrases, which he repeats a moment later. Jung pointed out that both dreams and slips of the tongue tend to compensate for defects in the waking attitude, especially any sort of one-sidedness. As in the yin-yang symbol, Trump tries to portray himself as all white, yang, masculine power, but the I'm weak slip, like the black dot in the white yang, shows his unconscious peeking through and tweaking his own nose. The most stunning and hilarious slips of the tongue I've ever heard have come from another man that may have thought, that many thought would never become president, George W. Bush. And you can see something I wrote called Exploring the Unconscious. It's actually a card from my Zap Oracle that quotes some of W's most amazing slips. Here's an example. The truth of that matter is, if you listen carefully, Saddam would still be in power if he were the president of the United States, and the world would be a lot better off. That was something that George W. Bush said during the second presidential debate in St. Louis on October 8th of 2004. This might seem amusing till you remember the high body count associated with political leaders who have unintegrated shadows. As Jung said, there is no such thing in nature as an H-bomb. That is all man's doing. We are the great danger. The psyche is the great danger. A corollary to that insight is that the psyche of political leaders and of the people who vote for them is also a great danger. As we should have learned from recent presidential history, a clown emerging from the Republican clown car nomination process, a weak clown who wants to show the world how strong he is, might turn into the killer clown of your nightmares. History is the nightmare from which I am trying to awaken. Stephen Dedalus, James Joyce's literary alter ego, said that probably early in the 20th century. Here's another George W. Bush quote. He said this in Washington, D.C. on August 5th of 2004. Our enemies are innovative and resourceful, and so are we. They never stop thinking about new ways to harm our country and our people, and neither do we. Here's another quote, something W said at the White House on December, because people have kind of like forgotten because of the unprecedented awfulness of Donald Trump. George W. Bush seems almost like this, calming professional figure now, but we forget that how frightening he was when a coin toss, the coin seemed to land on the edge in 2000, and the Supreme Court made him president. And he was also a little scarier because he was younger than Trump, far younger when he was elected, and still had a lot of like this youthful machismo and wanting to prove himself. But to be fair, I think that if George W. Bush were made president right now, and I'd gladly substitute him, I think he's learned a lot since then and has become a much humbler and wiser person, and is spending his days doing amateur oil painting and so forth, and thinking about what happened and everything. And you know, we paid the price for his education, but he certainly seems like a much more sane person right now than who we've got in the Oval Office at the moment. Okay, here's something else he said. Who could have possibly envisioned an election in Iraq at this point in history? Okay, there's another quote. As quoted by the San Antonio Express News, January 30th, 2000. The most important job... All right, the next article was written, it would appear right after Trump's nomination, and it's called Hurtling Toward Trumpocalypse. And that was the first time I used that word, though other people seem to have thought of it as well. Denial and bargaining have turned to resignation and acceptance that the next person that will be picking up the red phone in the Oval Office will not be me. I suspended my campaign a while back. There's a picture of me picking up the red phone in this article. And it won't be my safety backup choice, Bernie Sanders. The next president will be Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, and that means it is quite likely that it will be Donald Trump and that we are hurtling toward Trumpocalypse. Michael Moore just published an article entitled 5 Reasons Why Donald Trump Will Win. As H.L. Mencken said, no one ever went broke overestimating the crassness of the American people. And Trump is the king of crass. And his middle school, high school worldview resonates with so many whose intellect finished developing in the 9th grade, where they learned to size people up with put-downs and who's hot, who's not, winners, loser tags. I taught high school for 14 years in New York. And by the way, my dislike of Trump dates back to the early 80s, because living in New York City, you know, all the tabloids picked him up, and he seemed the most annoying of all celebrities, which is saying a lot when you think about how many annoying celebrities there are out there. And so my antipathy has a longer history than some people's. I taught high school for 14 years and have studied American popular culture for far longer, and have come to the realization that few Americans ever recover from high school. What I call the hollow folk, and you could see something I wrote called Beware the Hollow Folk, it's card number 62 in my Zap Oracle, are largely people whose minds, in scare quotes, sexuality and general attitudes were formed in high school or middle school, and who spend the rest of their lives as ungracefully aging adolescents, still longing for the high school image of success. To hollow folk, Trump seems like a successful genius. He speaks on a middle school level, and this has actually been confirmed by linguists. He makes dumb people feel like they're smart, like he's smart. And fuck all those book-reading experts who think they know more than the real Americans. And I also wrote an article called Real People Suck, an Imaginary Person's Manifesto, when I felt irate about Sarah Palin's emphasis on the real America, which was obviously not people living in places like New York or Boulder, Colorado. And the real Americans are the proud dumbasses who are pissed off that robots and Mexicans can outperform them, and who cling to their guns, fundamentalist religion, opiates, scapegoats, and heavily processed food. What Clinton aptly called the basket of deplorables. Some will push back on this and say, you don't get it. There's real legitimate anger out there, and Trump is channeling the anger of people who rightly feel the system is rigged against them. Yes, there is a legitimate rebellion from elite globalist types who have concentrated the planet's wealth. But remind me again of which times and places of human history wealth and power were not concentrated in an elite. Ancient Egypt? I don't think so. Anyway, Scandinavian countries of the present era, to some extent, maybe. Israeli kibbutz of the 1960s. What do you think Karl Marx was writing about in the 19th century? A thriving middle class and the heightened expectations of the American dream are more exception than rule. Elites concentrating an unfair share of wealth is the norm in history. though the degree of concentration fluctuates and is worse in this country than it was 40 years ago. And actually, some statistics came out recently where they measured this index, and our country is the worst on the planet as far as wealth concentration. And you've been hearing recently that, Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, and Bill Gates, just the three of them, have more wealth than the bottom half of the whole country of 150 million or so people. Elites concentrate, but those three guys are not as bad as a pharaoh or somebody like that, or a Vladimir Putin, who may be the richest man on the planet with all the money he's stolen. To put it in perspective, elites concentrating an unfair share of wealth is the norm. Okay, I guess I read that. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't do something about it. And my dad, by the way, was a socialist leader back in like the 40s and 50s and stuff, the Leninist Socialist Party or something. He got kicked out, by the way, for criticizing the ideology or something. This doesn't mean that we shouldn't do something about it. We should, but many people have an historical context that gets extremely foggy about what life was like before the birth of Facebook. What is also not new is a perception that life is tough, and anger that there's something wrong about this world and its rigged systems. I mean, that's basically what religion, read the book of Ecclesiastes. I mean, Jesus throwing over the tables of the money changers and so forth. As the movie The Matrix, which came out in 1999, during the financial prosperity of Clinton's second term, put it, there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. The Matrix was largely inspired by 2 millennia-old Gnostic texts that say we are living in a fallen world of illusions created by the masters of deceptions, the archons, a parasitic species manipulating us to create a harvest of dark emotions. And they also said that religious ideologies would keep us in a state of forever war, which is still the case, of course. My point is that people have always been angry at the rigged systems of the world. As Shakespeare's Hamlet put it, there's something rotten in the state of Denmark. A sense of wrongness about the whole reality is one of the most universal feelings of all time, at least for the last 6,000 years or so of the patriarchal era. And I wrote about this in a brief essay called A Splinter in Your Mind. You can find that on zaporacle.com. Religions were largely created to address the dark feelings people have about this reality. Sometime in that foggy pre-Facebook era, a few years before pissed-off Americans began to notice that they lived in a rigged system that defeated their dreams, there were old sayings like, the poor get poorer and the rich get richer. Perhaps Jesus, speaking in parables, had the rigged system in mind when he said, for whosoever hath, to him shall be given, and he shall have more abundance, but whosoever hath not, from him shall be taken away even that he hath. And that's from Matthew 13:12. And, people forget that if you look at the New Testament, the thing that Jesus has the most to say is about wealth inequality, and he has nothing to say about gays, for example. At 58, that was my age at the time when I wrote this, at the verge of becoming an old white guy myself, and now that it's 2 years later, I guess that process has completed itself. I can tell you that I don't recall a single year I've lived through when there wasn't a chorus of old white guys and plenty of folks in other demographics such as conspiracy-addled millennials singing the oldest golden oldie of them all, the world is going to hell in a handbasket song. Our earth is degenerate in these later days. There are signs that the world is speedily coming to an end. That was written on an Assyrian clay tablet in 2800 BC. I'm getting tired of people saying that Donald Trump is this completely unprecedented phenomenon that nothing in the past prepares us to understand. Just because he tweets doesn't make him new. He's just another cranky old egoist singing the oldest fucking song in the world is going to hell in a handbasket song. His Midnight in America fear-mongering convention speech is the same golden oldie that every populist demagogue since the late Paleolithic has been cranking out. So yeah, I get it. Donald Trump is channeling real anger out there. There's always real fear and anger out there, and there has always been the very serious hazard of inflated psychic scarecrows channeling that fear and anger. It doesn't matter if the social media platform is Twitter, a town square, or a high school locker room. There have been narcissistic bullies channeling people's fear and anger since time immemorial, and the only thing new about Donald Trump is his pioneering advancements in comb-over technology. People have always chosen one angry guy or another to personify their collective shadow. And of course, in the last week from the time of this recording, we just had what's hopefully the end of the appalling spectacle of Judge Roy Moore from Alabama talk about an angry white guy. And of course, he brought back memories of that other angry white guy from Alabama, George Wallace, for those old enough to remember. So the angry old white guy personifying collective rage of a certain demographic is not a new story. When people would ask Carl Jung, who actually met Hitler once, how was Hitler able to manipulate the German psyche, the psyche of the German people, he replied, Hitler didn't manipulate the German psyche, he was the German psyche. Donald Trump is a perfect personification of the shadow part of the American psyche. So was W. So is every popular demagogue. Dumbasses who can't own their own shadows and who don't have the historical context to realize that the world has always seemed wrong have always fallen in love with hollow strongman types who personify their own inner weakness. As Trump said on November 29th, I'm weak. Trumpology, a master class, you can Google that, is the most thorough article I've read on what animates a psychic scarecrow like Donald Trump. It was a bunch of authors who'd written books about Donald Trump getting together to talk about what they discovered about his personality. It's too bad that the power psychology of Alfred Adler, whose name was once nearly as prominent as Freud and Jung, has been largely forgotten. It was Adler who coined the terms superiority complex and inferiority complex. Adler wrote, we should not be, I wish I could do the German accent, but we should not be astonished if in the cases where we see an inferiority feeling complex, we find a superiority complex more or less hidden. On the other hand, if we inquire into a superiority complex and study its continuity, we can always find a more or less hidden inferiority complex. And another Adler quote, if a person is a show-off, it is only because she or he feels inferior, because she or he does not feel strong enough to compete with others on the useful side of life. That is why she or he stays on the useless side. It seems to be a trait of human nature that when individuals, both children and adults, feel weak, they want to solve the problems of life in such a way as to obtain personal superiority without any admixture of social interest. That sounds like a perfect definition of Donald Trump. Here's another Adler quote. The superiority complex is one of the ways that a person with an inferiority complex may use as a method of escape from his or her difficulties. She or he assumes that she or he is superior when she or he is not, and this false success compensates her or him for the state of inferiority which she or he cannot bear. And you can see the Wikipedia article, Superiority Complex. In a classically Adlerian way, Trump's need to constantly assert himself as the winner comes from a desperate inner recognition of weakness, as his amazing Freudian slip, also really an Adlerian slip, reveals. The demographic he appeals to is the same non-college educated white demographic that has had a shocking increase in early mortality. You may have heard about this. You could see an article, you could Google a shocking rise in white death rates midlife. And some of it is opioids and suicides and bad nutrition and other things. In other words, he appeals to demographics that are losing power, to people who have reason to fear that they are weak and who want to overcompensate by acting like bullies and trumped-up wannabe winners. I'm not comparing the two in the sense of an equivalency at all, but Hitler and Nazi comparisons, are almost all nonsense. But psychic scarecrows, and that was Jung's description of Hitler after meeting him. He shook his hand and said he felt like he was shaking hands with a psychic scarecrow. Psychic scarecrows are a subspecies that do have some things in common. They can become surrogates for little psychic scarecrows, what I call the hollow folk, and Jung called mass man. I think Gurdjieff called them the Hasnamus. Psychic scarecrows like Trump are a focal point for those who feel this sense of grievance and who want to compensate for feelings of weakness by smoking the crack of trumped-up egoism with chasers of sugar rush narcissism to get this quickly fading surge of rage and self-importance where they get to feel that they can transform weakness into being a winner or bully. So to summarize, I'm an angry older white guy who is angry at people who think that people getting duped by angry old white guys is anything new. When James Joyce wrote, "History is the nightmare from which I am trying to awaken," and that was probably very early in the 20th century he wrote that, he was talking about the nightmarish parade of Donald Trumps for the last 6 millennia. When William Butler Yeats wrote his apocalyptic poem, Second Coming, in 1919, and talked about a time when the best lack all conviction while the worst are full of passionate intensity, he was talking about Donald Trump, a time that began over 6,000 years ago. In other words, the patriarchal era. Here's how Yeats described Donald Trump in 1919. "A gaze blank and pitiless as the sun is moving its slow thighs while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle, and what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem to be born." So, Donald Trump is not the first rough beast with slow thighs to come slouching down the skull-shadowed corridors of history. Trumpocalypses are nothing new. But what's also not new is that it sucks to live through Trumpocalypses. And the way to prevent the Trumpocalypse slouching toward us right now is to suck it up and vote for Hillary Clinton. She's not Bernie Sanders, not Elizabeth Warren, and voting for her might feel like drinking a big gulp of aspartame-sweetened Diet Dr. Pepper when you prefer rose petal goji berry-infused kombucha. But the bottom line reality is that Hillary is significantly less likely to trigger a Trumpocalypse than Donald Trump. Bill Maher quoted someone who said, "I disagree with Hillary about almost everything, but she's within the normal range for being wrong." I know some very intelligent people who want to see Trump win because they recognize him as a trickster wild card and want to see the system shaken up. I grew up in the Bronx during the time when the system fell apart, when New York City and especially the Bronx was like the Wild West in the early 70s and so on. And the sky glowed orange at night from burning apartment buildings. Don't get me wrong, I like post-apocalyptic hellscapes as much as the next guy, and it's hard to find a high-budget sci-fi film that doesn't have them. But I learned from my early Bronx years that they are actually not that much fun to live through. I don't much want to live in a status quo house where a scolding bossy mom wears the pantsuits, a Hillary Clinton administration in other words, but I'll take that over living in Mordor or in the dungeon of a looming Trump tower crowned with a comb-over of orange flames. 16 years ago, I pleaded with my friends who were too pure to vote for Al Gore. Republicats, there's no difference, they told me. They voted for Ralph Nader or not at all, and we got W, the war with Iraq and financial meltdown. Just as I was about to finish this article, a scary synchronicity came in the form of a CNN breaking news alert. A large hot air balloon carrying at least 16 people caught fire in flight Saturday morning and crashed in Lockhart, Texas, the Federal Aviation Administration said. There were no survivors, the Caldwell County Sheriff's Office said in a statement to CNN affiliate TWC News, Austin. Another hot air balloon wants to carry away 300 million people, including you and most of your friends and family. Will you let it? All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. All that is necessary for the triumph of Trumpocalyptic evil is for good people not to vote for Hillary Clinton. Okay, my next article, also before the election, is called Never Trust a Winner. And it begins with a quote, a Donald Trump quote from Time Magazine 2015. My life has been about winning. My life has not been about losing. And I'm sorry I don't have a better Donald Trump voice. I do have a New York accent, but I wish I could channel Stephen Colbert. But the article does include the following video clip, which I can play for you.
You're going to be so proud of your country if I get in. You're going to be so proud of your president, and I don't care about that. But you are going to be so proud of your country because we're going to turn it around, and we're going to start winning again. We're going to win so much. We're going to win at every level. We're going to win economically. We're going to win with the economy. We're going to win with military. We're going to win with health care and for our veterans. We're going to win with every single facet. We're going to win so much, you may even get tired of winning. And you'll say, please, please, it's too much winning. We can't take it anymore. Mr. President, it's too much. And I'll say, no, it isn't. We have to keep winning. We have to win more. We're going to win more. We're going to win so much. I love you, Albany. Get out.
Okay, we're going to win so much. We'll get tired of winning. Hasn't happened so far. But maybe that winning streak is just taking a little longer than expected to get going. But a person who needs to call themselves a winner is a weak and brittle narcissist with a two-dimensional mind that desperately needs others to be losers so that they can prop up their inflated, hollow self-esteem. A self-proclaimed winner is someone whose psychology became fixed in middle school or high school, where popularity in sports contests were zero-sum games of who won or lost the big football game, who's hot, who's not, and who scored with whom and who didn't. The two-dimensional winner view of life is a game defined by winners and losers. Physical intimacy is not a mysterious union, but a guy's game where winners score by penetrating a trophy sex object. Here's a Donald Trump quote from Think Big, Make It Happen in Business and Life, 2008. Oftentimes when I was sleeping with one of the top women in the world, I would say to myself, thinking about me as a boy from Queens, can you believe what I'm getting? Here's something he said on the Howard Stern show about on sleeping with women who could have STDs. I've been so lucky in terms of that whole world. It is a dangerous world out there. It's scary, like Vietnam, sort of like the Vietnam era. It is my personal Vietnam. I feel like a great and very brave soldier. A 70-year-old who still talks in a way that many modern middle schoolers would find immature is a developmentally stunted narcissist. If you think a winner is going to do anything for you, talk to a graduate from Donald Trump University. To be a winner, you need to make sure that others are losers. You can't be a win-win person because you need something that elevates you above others. You need to live on top of a Trump tower. You need an endless supply of losers to triumph over. And also, for narcissists, this is called narcissistic supply, where you have to have people praising you, you have to have people that you're able to put down and elevate yourself and so forth. To be a winner, you need to never question your entitlement to be the winner. You're the winner, so of course you always deserve to win. End of story. Someone under the spell of Donald Trump reading this would probably say, this sounds like the perspective of a loser, some intellectual guy who never won anything, so he resents winners like Donald Trump. Okay, there's enough adolescent narcissism in me to descend to that level for a moment. I've never been much of a contest person, but when I was 14, I became part of the Bronx High School of Science debate team, the #1 debate team in the country, the most winning team in the country, in other words. In my first tournament, I was the #1 ranked speaker in my age group in the multi-state Mid-Hudson League. But here's what's more relevant about that. The kids that I knew on the most winning debate team in the country were some of the smartest people I ever met, and they weren't nerds. Most of them were popular, good-looking, and had highest social skills and extremely high social conscience. But they never talked about themselves as winners, and there wasn't a culture to support that. The Bronx High School of Science of the early 70s had no prom, no football team, and with less focus on winning at sports and popularity contests, like the Long Island high school I talked to that had like all that stuff right up there in the hallways, sponsored by the school, you know, who won best looking and who won most popular and all this kind of dreadful stuff. And they also canceled my English classes to have pep rallies for the football team. That's when I first discovered what high school, American high school was like, was when I was a teacher, late in my teaching career, actually. But despite the less focus on winning and at sports and popularity contests, Bronx Science produced more future Nobel Prize winners, there's that word again, 8 of them, 7 in physics, than any other secondary school in the whole world. And here's the most relevant part, my most vivid memory of my time with the Bronx Science debate team. The whole team got together for a Friday night party at a slightly dingy apartment a couple of blocks from where I lived in the Bronx. And it was actually, we all played Monopoly, and I was the winner. Probably just because I spent a lot more time playing Monopoly than anybody else on the team. But anyway, the captain of the team, a sage like, I think his name was Martin Markovic, of the team, a sage-like and humble, handsome, and charismatic young guy with long hair who had just gotten a scholarship to Yale, initiated a serious discussion I participated in on the ethics of debate. He confessed to having doubts about the morality of debate contests because it seemed to him that we might be wishing harm on our opponents by seeking to beat them. If Donald Trump had overheard this conversation, he would have branded this as the perspective of total losers. But these kids were the most winning team at what they did in the entire country. Unlike winners, they didn't think of themselves as entitled to win and question their own motives, their own darkness, which is something that winners never do. A winner is too weak to face their own shadow, and therefore they must project it onto another person or group. Like here's something that Donald Trump said. Rosie O'Donnell's a disgusting both inside and out. You take a look at her, she's a slob. She talks like a truck driver. She doesn't have her facts. She'll say anything that comes to her mind. I mean, she's basically a disaster. Makes me think of some other celebrity who doesn't have their facts and will say anything that comes to their mind. For a winner, that's called shadow projection, obviously. For a winner, winning isn't everything. It's the only thing. There's no room to reflect on what the need to always be the winner says about their character. A winner is someone whose inner weakness fills them with a need for power and glory. The price of their winning is misery for a great many other people, like so many of the people who did work for Trump businesses and got paid only a fraction, if anything, of what was agreed, who got scammed by shady Trump real estate promotions or Trump University. If Trump wins, the world loses. And we are getting tired of the losing right now. Unfortunately, there is only one thing any of us can realistically do to prevent that. And yeah, I get the distastefulness of this for many of you, but that one thing is to vote for Hillary. It's been said that all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. The corollary of that is all that is necessary for the triumph of Trump and Trumpism is for good people not to vote for Hillary Clinton. Voting for Hillary is the only realistic way to keep the world from losing. I realize that many of my friends feel too ideologically pure to choose the lesser of two evils and so forth. These are the same folks who shouted Republicrats at me in 2000 when I tried to point out that Gore was a far lighter shade of gray than W. Their sense of their own purity wouldn't allow them to settle for the only realistic alternative, Al Gore. And so they either didn't vote or voted for Ralph Nader, and the rest, as they say, is history. A history that includes tax cuts for billionaires and invading Iraq because of imaginary weapons of mass destruction. The Clintons deserve plenty of criticism. And I'm pretty sick of it myself, to be honest, at the moment. But some of it is highly exaggerated. And you can see an article I wrote that I'm not reading because it's not about Trump specifically, but it's called "The Demonizing of High-Profile Democrats, a same old shadow projection." Before Kennedy was shot in Texas, they had up on lampposts and stuff flyers that had a wanted poster look with him in profile and so forth, saying wanted for treason, John Kennedy, and so forth. And so this was something that was said about FDR, Truman, Clinton, Carter, and so on. I would expect Clinton to be a competent president, not my fantasy of what a president could be. I also think some, but not all, of the negativity about her is because of gender stereotyping. As the New York Times just reported, this is a Trump speaking to David Muir of ABC. Well, I just don't think she has a presidential look, and you need a presidential look. That echoed a remark he made Monday when speaking to a small group of mostly men in Cleveland. Mr. Trump asked skeptically, and she looks presidential, fellas? In other words, fellas, Hillary Clinton doesn't have a presidential look because she's not a fella. A winner is supposed to be an alpha male and is not supposed to be, as Elizabeth Warren put it, getting beaten by a girl. Whatever ambivalence or distaste you might have for Hillary, consider the historic opportunity to have a female president and what that will mean for the evolution of gender roles. Help the winner lose and think of yourself as helping to score a history-making win for gender equality. Well, you can probably tell from my bragging about the Bronx High School science debate team that I, too, am a narcissist, and I admit that throughout my writings. I like to think of myself as a partly recovering narcissist, and I was never someone with narcissistic personality disorder like Trump has, which is a much more serious condition and where you do reprehensible things to other people. But it kind of takes one to know one, and that narcissism will be pretty on display in the following article called Can Post-Trumpocalyptic Retrocausation Save Mankind?, in which I include some Facebook posts. Some of them are quite vulgar. Be forewarned, you've already heard a little bad language here. There's something about the Trumpocalypse that brings out that side of myself, I guess. And there's quite a bit of narcissism, too, as it's based on the idea that some of my Facebook status updates and reality sandwich articles might be able to keep Trumpocalypse from ever happening through retrocausation. And it's told in the form of a post-Trumpocalyptic sci-fi story, partly. Status update, September 19th at AT24. In other words, 24 years after Trumpocalypse, AT. Our underground nuclear-powered biosphere is failing, and now there are only 6 of us left, and our oxygen levels are dropping 8% every 36 hours. Today I took the turbo lift up to the surface to take a last selfie in front of the rotting carcass of a commercial airliner. I was traveling in Iceland at the time and posed in front of such a rotting commercial airliner in the middle of a strange black desert. First Medical Officer Reynolds says even 2 minutes on the surface is enough radiation exposure to kill you in a month. But what difference does it make if your oxygen supply will only last for days? When the end is near, you forget the little stuff and grasp for what can still give your life meaning. Selfies and the remnants of social media still remaining. Of the 5 other human beings still alive, 3, that's over 50%, liked my selfie, and the other 2 survivors passively-aggressively responded with obscure emoticons. But the point is, I'm still alive, and I can still status update, therefore I am. Only one hope remains. Professor Heisenberg has been working feverishly on his retrocausation experiments. He says that he has actually been able to digitally hack into the past and manipulate Facebook status updates exactly a quarter of a century in the time before Trump's election and the ensuing Trumpocalypse. Professor Heisenberg claims to have successfully altered the Facebook status updates of the noted visionary writer and philosopher Jonathan Zapp, and says this may have such a powerful effect on the collective unconscious that it could actually prevent Trumpocalypse from ever happening. His choice of targets, however, strikes me as very odd. Sure, this Jonathan Zapp is an exceptionally handsome and charismatic guy, and yeah, everything we know now confirms that all of his prophetic insights were perfectly accurate, but still, in 2016, he was at best a minor public figure. Why not manipulate one of Donald Trump's tweets or post one of the photos leaked in 2017 of Donald Trump masturbating on his knees in Trump Tower before a giant poster of a shirtless Vladimir Putin? But Heisenberg says all the calculations he's done have been confirmed by our AI supercomputer, and it looks like there's no doubt that the future of the world, more than any other factor, is shaped by the Facebook status updates of this one guy, Jonathan Zapp. The only other factors that remotely compare and power are Zapp's reality sandwich articles and his award-winning ZappOracle.com website. His free 664-card oracle, the Zapp Oracle, apparently provided users with so much prescient insight into the future that it makes the past timeline more fluid and capable of retrocausative influence. When I told Professor Heisenberg I was writing my last status update, he asked that I include the Zapp Facebook status updates he inserted into the past in my status update. He said that he might even be able to use retrocausation to project my final status update 25 years into the past, where it would appear as an anomalous reality sandwich article. Zapp status update, September 17th, 2016. And I'm going to try and do my Alex Jones voice. Wake up, sheeple. 90% of the people on Facebook, even those who pretend to support Trump, are on the Clinton Foundation payroll. Connect the dots, sheeple. 9/11 was a Clinton Foundation inside job. Every day, tens of thousands of American children are being abducted by the Clinton Foundation and put in FEMA camps where they're implanted with chips and brainwashed to become UN Special Forces troops who call themselves progressives and liberals that will confiscate your guns and impose Sharia law. And another thing the mainstream Clinton-controlled corporate media won't tell you is that if you say Hillary backwards, it sounds just like ISIS. Wake up, sheeple. Freedom isn't free. Repost this now or the terrorists have already won. Okay, Zapp status update, September 18th, 2016. A former student, former NYPD friend of mine, who managed to retire with a six-figure salary in his early 40s, and most of the people that I've fought with about Trump on Facebook are former students of mine when I taught on Long Island in the 80s and early 90s. Anyway, so this friend of mine, a former NYPD, told me that he's going to vote for Trump. He was originally going to vote for Bernie as a, quote, fuck you message to the elites, unquote. And he inspired me to leave a rather vulgar, but I guess nothing is too vulgar for this election, comment on his page. And this is what I wrote. You seem to be giving voice to an acting out streak of adolescent rebellion in the American psyche. It's like a 16-year-old girl, tired of her parents' arrogant pretensions, the fronts they put up, their areas of hypocrisy, privileged arrogance, overbearing paternalism, white-collar workaholism, etc. And now here comes a schwilly biker dude with a big gut, an eye patch, and gold pinky rings. He rolls up in a tastelessly trumped-up gold-plated Harley and says, I like your rack, little lady. Hop on the back seat and Daddy'll take care of everything. Your parents are assholes, so what the hell do you have to lose? I'll fix everything so good and so fast you'll actually get tired of all the quick fixing I'm going to do for you. Believe me. What you're not seeing... what you're not seeing, speaking to my NYPD friend, is the same thing the 16-year-old girl isn't seeing. That moment 2 weeks down the road when she wakes up in a dumpster with a used condom in her ass and her new daddy nowhere to be found as she discovers a nostalgic longing for her educated, white-collar, politically correct, somewhat overbearing parents. 6 months into Trumpocalypse, you'll be shaking on the roof of your house, if it hasn't been foreclosed, trying to project a bat signal into the dark Trumpocalyptic sky, praying for the return of an Obama or Clinton and a world of competent elites. Zap status update, September 19th, 2016. In a comment attempting to defend Trump he later removed, the same friend who got my whole Trump thread started said that, quote, smart businessmen choose to go bankrupt every 7 years, unquote. Here's my response. In the beer-goggled view of certain angry white guys, Donald Trump is a man's man and winner, and everything he does has the testosterone halo of the Trump brand. According to PolitiFact, in the first of his 6 bankruptcies, Trump, quote, funded the construction of the $1 billion Trump Taj Mahal Casino in Atlantic City, New Jersey, which opened in 1990, primarily with junk bonds at a whopping 14% interest. A year later, the casino was nearly $3 billion in debt, while Trump had racked up nearly $900 million in personal liabilities. So Trump decided to file for Chapter 11 reorganization, according to the New York Times. As a result, Trump gave up half his personal stake in the casino and sold his yacht and airline, according to the Washington Post. The only reason Donald Trump's bankruptcy in Atlantic City wasn't permanent financial ruin is that the bankers recognized, in their words, Trump is worth more to us alive than dead. They propped up the gold-plated scarecrow because they wanted him to be their charlatan super salesman to help sell off his assets. But many small business owners and contractors were ruined by Trump's bankruptcy. His next bankruptcy, second of 6, was Trump Castle, which collapsed despite a desperate and illegal attempt by his daddy to prop it up. This is from an April 9th, 1991 article. Atlantic City, one of Donald Trump's casinos, has admitted that it broke the law and violated terms of its license when the developer's father lent it $3.5 million by purchasing gaming chips when he had no plans to gamble, the State Division of Gaming Enforcement said yesterday. 6 disgraceful bankruptcies, but then Donald Trump says, "Don't believe your lying eyes, little ladies." And the beer-goggled Trumpster heads to swallow every... And the beer-goggled Trumpster heads swallow every flimsy lie he ejaculates about how people were congratulating me about the smart move I made getting out of Atlantic City when I did. This is like a rich kid who crashes his dad's Ferrari and has to walk home covered in blood and broken glass saying, people were congratulating me for getting into walking as the smart form of cardio. Okay, Zap status update, September 20th of 2016. It shows a picture of a looks like a very promising Nazi family with a logo, a black, white, and red logo for Trump Pence. Someone posted this prophetic image on yesterday's thread about Trump's bankruptcies, and while I understand why this would be an aspirational image for the Trump campaign, I have to say that it is seriously unfair to the Nazi movement, which was so much better organized and had such an effective ground game, as well as a more symmetrical logo. Also, Hitler didn't go bankrupt 6 times, and Eva Braun never plagiarized Anne Frank in the way that Melania Trump plagiarized Michelle Obama. Hitler didn't like FDR, but he didn't spend 5 years claiming he wasn't really an American citizen. Hitler was willing to work with Joseph Stalin for a while, but he didn't have a man crush on him like Trump has for Vladimir Putin. Also, Nazi Germany still had real universities and didn't rip off its own people with a Hitler university. As a Jew, I recognize that Hitler had many faults, but I wouldn't say he was all talk. When he came up with a final solution, he did fall through in it, while Trump's wall will never get built. Hitler ended his days in a modest bunker, and while, like Trump, he never apologized about anything, he did make the consoling gesture of both biting a cyanide capsule and shooting himself in the head, while Trump is likely to spend his final days in the penthouse of Trump Tower, surrounded by comb-over technicians watching reruns of The Apprentice. Final status update, epilogue. If Heisenberg is able to insert any more of these prophetically visionary Zap Facebook status updates into the past, I will update my final status update to include them, so please check back. If you're reading this in the past, in pre-Trumpocalypse 2016, when the internet still existed, then you'll know Heisenberg's digital retrocausation experiments worked. Heisenberg Also asked me to inform anyone reading this in the past that they can contribute to the prevention of Trumpocalypse by reading and reposting all of Zapp's articles about the 2016 election. Okay, well, the next article is a little bit sloppy. It was written at high speed. It came, I think it was written right after Donald Trump said that he ended the birtherism controversy. And I was just so irritated. I felt like I had to channel him and write an article from his voice. And I'll try and go through it quickly. It's called Jonathan J. Zapp, Making Facebook Great Again, 2016. I didn't start the Zuckerberg controversy. That was started by Google in 2008, but I ended it with my amazingly successful Facebook posts. And I really have to congratulate myself on my successful winning with that and the truly amazing things I was able to accomplish for the American people by being so successful and making social media great again. Believe me, folks, it's just unbelievable. You just can't believe what people out there are saying about me. The support out there for me is tremendous. It's tremendous, believe me. You just can't believe the great things I'm hearing about myself from the little people out there about how great I am. It's tremendous, unbelievable, believe me. And it's not just about me. It's also about what I've been able to accomplish with one amazingly successful Facebook post after another. Just one winning post right after another. Unbelievable. Unbelievable the tremendous success I've had. It's just tremendous what I've been able to do for myself and what people are saying about the tremendous success I am. And I've had that success because unlike a loser like Mark Zuckerberg, I have a winning temperament. But you know what, folks? I don't care about me. I care about you. Believe me, folks, it's true. I just have a fiduciary responsibility to myself to promote myself and continue to be such a great success. Look, I was smart. I was really, really smart. And a lot of people give me credit for that. A lot of people out there give me credit for how smart I am because I knew how to take advantage of the rules of Facebook to make myself a total success, an unbelievable success. And I was able to be such a successful winner on Facebook because I know the Facebook system better than anyone, and that's why I'm the only one who can fix it. Believe me, right now, Facebook is a total disaster. But I will fix it, and I will fix it really, really quickly so that Facebook can start winning again and become great again. Right now, Facebook is just a disaster, a total disaster. You just can't believe what people are telling me about it. Believe me, folks, it's just a total disaster. African Americans, Latinos, their posts are just being shot down by marauding trolls all over the place. A total disaster. The worst it's ever been in human history. The worst. Unbelievable. This Mark Zuckerberg, he's been there. He's been on Facebook for 30 years, and he's done absolutely nothing. A total disaster. Zuckerberg is just a total disaster. He's a racist, a bigot, a rapist, a murderer, a total disaster, and his wife looks like a pig, like some kind of cheap Chinese pig. It's just disgusting the way she looks. I don't even know if she's a 2. I'm married to a 10, and he's married to a 2, if she even is a 2. Unbelievable. And he doesn't even look like a CEO. Am I right, folks? Does Zuckerberg look like a CEO? He wears hoodies to work. It's disgusting. It's unbelievably disgusting. When I'm in charge of Facebook, I'm going to have a social media police that are going to prosecute Zuckerberg and put him in jail. I'm going to lock Zuckerberg up in jail, lock him up, and throw away the key, and then I'll make Zuckerberg pay for the key I just threw away. You just can't believe what I'm hearing out there about how angry people are about what a disaster, a total disaster Zuckerberg's been. Right now, for the blacks, Facebook is just a total disaster. And that's why I told the blacks, what the hell have you got to lose? And you know what? They believe me. You just can't believe what I'm hearing out there about how much the blacks support me on this and with everything. Believe me, it's true. And the Latinos and the women, the little women, it's just unbelievable how much all the little women out there love me and support me. When you're a star, it's just like that. The women love you. It's unbelievable. As soon as they see me, they just start kissing me, and they can't stop. I don't even have to use Tic Tacs because they just can't stop kissing me. I don't even have to use Tic Tacs to have total success with the kissing, but I use them anyway because no one respects women more than me. Even women don't respect women as much as me. The truth is, folks, that women aren't even capable of respecting themselves as much as I respect them. They're just not capable. That's the way it is. Believe me, I'm hearing from a lot of people out there that it's not that easy to respect women because most of them just can't get the job done. But I respect them anyway. I respect them far more than they're even capable of respecting themselves. A lot of them can't get the job done, and if they do, you know what, folks? They actually expect to get paid for it as much as a man. Unbelievable. They're always getting pregnant and missing work, and they still expect to get paid like men. Can you believe that? Give me a break. And most of them aren't even forced, but I respect them anyway. No one respects women the way I do. They just need to lose some weight. Okay, a lot of weight. And then I'll respect them even more. I respect women so much, I even let my super hot daughter, Izapka, become a woman. And a lot of people out there give me tremendous credit for that. I love women, and women love me even more, far more. But you know what I hear from a lot of you out there? It's true. A lot of these women, like Hillary Clinton, are like these little motor mouths who just can't stop running their mouths, yada, 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 and it's all words, and nothing gets done. But I respect them anyway. Most women, the vast majority of women, aren't even fives, but not even close to being fives. But you know what, folks? I respect them anyway. But right now, for the women and for the Latinos, right now, Facebook is a total disaster. But I'm going to fix it, folks. Believe me, I'm going to fix Facebook and make it great again, and I'm going to do it really, really quickly. Okay, the next article, also before the election, is called Docudrama on Trump's Early Years, provides cautionary insights. And begins with something that Donald Trump said in a private comment to Sean Hannity about the first stirrings of his presidential ambition early in childhood. I remembered the moment well, that sense of dark inevitability and destiny after discovering the 3 red sixes birthmark under my scalp. At that moment, I realized that Gregory Peck was not my real father, and that one day my dark hair would turn into a strange reddish comb-over, and I would become a monstrously dangerous buffoon called upon to curse men and women and throw the whole world into turmoil. Although The Omen is a dramatization, and some names and places have been altered, it does provide a well-researched and highly accurate biographical account of Donald Trump's early life. The film comes from neither the left nor the right and takes a neutral and objective stance toward its subject while allowing certain cautionary themes to emerge from certain key moments of Donald Trump's early life. Okay, next article, also pre-election. Breaking news, RNC to dump Trump-Pence in favor of a Camacho-Smith ticket. In a bold move sure to stir controversy, RNC Chairman Ryan Priebus announced today that the Republican Party is going to officially dump the Trump-Pence ticket. I like Donald Trump, said Priebus at the packed Washington, D.C. press conference, and he has already done a lot to make America great again. But let's face it, he's like the Galaxy Note 7, a great device packed with advanced features. I was able to ignore the first few dozen explosions and fires it caused, but after a certain point, even an anti-regulation and pro-business party has got to agree to a recall. It's time to get back to our roots. Our greatest president, Ronald Reagan, was a movie star, not a reality television star, and our new winning ticket provides you with not just one, but 2 movie stars. At the head of our ticket is not just any movie star, but one who successfully played the President of the United States of America in the movies. Please give it up for the next President of the United States, Dwayne Elizondo Mountain Dew Herbert Camacho. This is a man who deeply understands the image of the presidency necessary to make America even greater again. At that point, Camacho joined Priebus on the stage. He offered no comments, but in a gesture of Second Amendment solidarity with the Republican base, he raised a giant M240 machine gun into the air and fired off a thunderous round of heavy-caliber bullets. "Booyah," said Chairman Priebus, who is now covered in plaster dust that had fallen from the ceiling following Camacho's automatic weapons fire. And now, backing up Camacho, a vice president who will have a portfolio of responsibilities even larger than Dick Cheney's, including all domestic and foreign affairs. Please give it up for the star of the Matrix films, Agent Smith. Agent Smith, wearing his trademark sunglasses, dark suit, and stern expression, joined Priebus on the stage. Reading from prepared remarks, Agent Smith, speaking in his characteristically slow and over-enunciated cadence, thanked Priebus for his selection and remarked, The American people know that there are two lives that lie before them. One life clings to the past with an excessive preoccupation with civil liberties, freedom of expression, and individuality. The other life involves boldly striding forward into a technologically advanced 21st century. One of these lives has a future, the other one does not. Priebus added, to bring greater consistency to the new administration and reduce security leaks, Agent Smith has generously offered to employ cloned copies of himself to head all cabinet posts. Several Agent Smith clones joined them on the stage before Priebus continued. Finally, last but certainly not least, our former nominee, a great businessman who offered his resignation in exchange for heading up a brand new government department that will make America even greater again. Please join me in giving it up for the one, the only, Donald Trump, who will join the Camacho-Smith administration as head of our new Department of Women's Affairs. Or affairs with the women, as I like to think of it, said Donald Trump, winking at the audience as he interrupted Priebus and strode confidently to the podium. Look, I know some of you think I've taken advantage of the women. That makes me smart. I've been able to take advantage of the women because I understand them better than anyone else, and this is why I am the only one who can fix them. And believe me, they need fixing. No one respects women more than I do, but believe me, folks, right now these women are a total disaster. Look, I married a 10, and my daughter Ivanka is a super hot 10, but let's face it, folks, most of the women in this country aren't even 5s. Most of them are loud, bossy, and fat, really fat, and it's a total disaster. I have the greatest respect for women, but you know as well as I do that most of them are fat eating machines. It's disgusting. I don't even want to think about it. Yesterday I had a long meeting with Agent Smith, who has the biotechnology code writing skills to reprogram our women into 9s and 10s, and that's why I made the decision to once again sacrifice my personal ambitions to make America even greater again, and to join forces with Agent Smith to defeat crooked Hillary and her rapist husband once and for all. Priebus and the RNC's selection of Camacho and Agent Smith as running mates is part of a burgeoning trend of popular celebrities entering politics. Opponents of the RNC, such as New York Democratic Senator Charles Schumer, immediately criticized the new ticket. I see a huge conflict of interest here, said Schumer at an impromptu news conference. It is well known that Agent Smith has close ties to the 01 Corporation and the Matrix, which are known to have an agenda of global domination of the human race and employ deceptive holographic simulations to keep human beings under the control of a giant computer network. A spokesperson for the RNC dismissed the criticism as irrelevant and partisan. This is a typical example of Democrats playing divisive partisan politics in an election year. The American people are smarter than that. It should be obvious to anyone who saw Matrix Revolution that Agent Smith has become increasingly independent of the Matrix. Governor Schwarzenegger is well known to have connections to Skynet, a rival computer network seeking domination of the planet, but that has not kept him from serving with distinction as governor of California, said the RNC spokesperson. All right, the next article is called All the Conspiracy Theories About Hillary Are True Big League. And this was written just before the election when it looked like Hillary was going to win, and I was being driven crazy by all these conspiracy theories about Hillary being sent to me by my former students on Long Island. This is the most humbling day of my life. My overlords at the Clinton Foundation have just called to tell me that I will be the next Imperial Field Marshal of Long Island, New York, as well as Imperial Viceroy of the Boulder, Denver area. Now that the rigged election is really in the bag, I might as well admit that all the conspiracies about Hillary were actually planted by the Clinton Foundation to get gullible people to think that Hillary was merely the most corrupt politician of all time and not what she will actually be, the historic, glass-ceiling-shattering first reptilian American president of the Earth. You can't believe the partying already going on here at the Reptilian Illuminati Alliance New World Order headquarters a mile beneath the Denver International Airport. But listen, I don't want to gloat. On behalf of the Reptilian Illuminati American community, I just wanted to say that we realize that we have the responsibility to rule over all Americans, not just the ones that voted for us. To my friends on Long Island, it's not too late for many of you to vote for Hillary. If you do, as Imperial Field Marshal of Long Island, I can offer to permanently elevate your subjugation status to Platinum Preferred VIP vassal, which includes something terrific and lots of big league benefits. But even if you don't vote for Hillary, here's what we're going to do to provide as an olive branch. Without visibly increasing your taxes at all, we're going to put all of you into a deceptive matrix stocked with lots of imaginary steak, imaginary guns, Cool Ranch Doritos, and most of the other things that you're used to that make life worth it. When you wake up on November 9th and Hillary is president-elect, you won't hear or see any of what's actually going on. Guns being confiscated by UN troops, babies being ripped from their mothers' wombs and sent to FEMA camps, real patriotic Americans standing blindfolded before Obamacare firing squads to make room for the 650 million Syrian refugees Hillary has promised to make full citizens. Instead, when you wake up on November 9th, even though you will have permanently lost the real America, things are going to look exactly the same as usual. Your gun will still be under your pillow. Your neighborhoods will still look mostly segregated. You'll still be able to spend your day masturbating to online pornography and playing first-person shooter video games. The stores will still be overflowing with all your favorite food-like substances. You won't notice much of any change except the economy will continue to gradually improve and millennials will be getting more help with college tuition. In a couple of years, you will even seemingly have the freedom to get into a roid rage about the next toxic clown for president, Ted Cruz, Trump 2020. You'll still be able to shout, "Lock her up" at rallies and put red, white, and blue and peach Hillary bumper stickers on your pickup trucks. In actuality, we will have taken away your guns, babies, and religion, but you'll be able to live blissfully unaware of what's actually happened. Yeah, you'll have to live with the knowledge that Hillary is president, but you can still support obstructionist Republicans in Congress and still dream of a Trumptopia or a Cruztopia in just 4 more years. Yeah, on some hidden level of reality, you'll be living in a socialist, Sharia law-based hellscape, but you won't actually notice any of it. It's going to be so much more awesome, big league more awesome than anything you are imagining. Hillary, Making the Matrix Great Again, 2016. All right, the next article was written the morning after the election, and it's called Dispatch from the Trumpocalypse, and of course it's much more somber and funereal in tone, as you might expect. By prior arrangement, I flew from Denver to Austin on Election Day, arriving a few hours before any election results. I met up with my friend Brant, and we went to the Weather Up Bar in East Austin to watch the returns. Boulder was aglow with high desert sun, but Austin was heavily overcast from the moment I landed. As the election results started coming in, a heavy rain began that continued throughout the traumatic night. And one thing I don't think I mentioned in the article is that one of the group of, Brant's girlfriend is a Mexican-American young woman, and who was absolutely traumatized in a much more personal way than any of us because it threatened her ability to stay in the country and everything. Now it's the day after, and the heavy overcast has continued all day, a funereal pall that feels so appropriate to what I'm feeling, a feeling that seems to resonate with the downcast gaze of numerous people I've seen on the street. It's an odd and pervasive feeling, not something I'm used to feeling about elections. It feels more like the devastating aftermath of a great disappointment in love, a deep body sadness, which doesn't quite make sense since it's not like I was ever in love with Hillary. Perhaps it is an anticipation of the future consequences of the terrible outcome. The Leonard Cohen song, Everybody Knows, captures some of it. And ironically, the day after I wrote that, Leonard Cohen died. And here's a little bit of Everybody Knows.
Everybody rolls with their fingers crossed. Everybody knows the war is over. Everybody knows the good guys lost.
Well, you get the idea. That's how it felt. I think part of the feeling of almost adolescent rejection or betrayal is that Trump is a high school bully with such personal put-downs that actually, that can activate your own adolescent complexes. I'm from New York City, where Trump's obnoxious presence was known before he even became a national figure, and my antipathy to him goes back to the 80s when I was a young man. I wanted to see him finally taken down so badly, and it seemed so sure that it was about to happen, when instead I found that he would now be my president. It was like the bully was standing over me and saying, "Who's your daddy now?" There's also a feeling that the Matrix was manipulated in some way to create an outcome that even the most optimistic people in the Trump campaign did not anticipate. For those who follow The Walking Dead, it feels weirdly parallel to the triumph of Negan, like coming home one day to find your mom cuddling with Negan on the sofa, an improvised engagement ring on her finger. Every poll showed Hillary ahead, and there was a feeling of black magical legerdemain, as if we had somehow been shuffled into an alternate reality that wasn't in the cards just a few hours before. But the psyche cannot be fully captured by even the most sophisticated statistical analysis. The people in the Trump campaign who insisted that the raw enthusiasm of the crowds Trump drew was more important than the polls have been proven right. Economists have learned that what they call animal spirits drive market fluctuations, and no amount of number crunching can anticipate such primordial forces. In my earlier article, Hurtling Toward Trumpocalypse, I quoted the prophetic lines from William Butler Yeats' apocalyptic poem, The Second Coming. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity and higher voter turnout. Elections, like market fluctuations, are driven by animal spirits, and sometimes the driving animal spirit is a rabid dog. And I keep providing the same quotes over and over again from James Joyce and Jung. But James Joyce put it, "History is the nightmare from which I am trying to awaken." We've been careening down the long, skull-shadowed corridors of history for a long time, and the legends of history keep repeating. People are always angry and pissed off about the human condition, and there are always charismatic con men able to channel that anger for their own purposes. What most conscious people learn early on is that society is not your friend. There are stable periods when the perks of civilization seem to make the trade-offs worth it, but human collectives tend to be driven by lowest common denominator forces: fear, anger, greed, and you never know when those primal, irrational drives are going to rise up and assert their power to create tragic magic. As Jung put it, and I know I've read this quote before, but I want everybody to remember it: "There is no hydrogen bomb in nature. That is all man's doing. We are the great danger. Psyche is the great danger." And as I said before, when people asked Jung, who met Hitler, how he manipulated the psyche of the German people, Jung replied, he didn't manipulate the psyche of the German people. He was the psyche of the German people. Donald Trump generated more passion than Hillary because he so perfectly personifies key aspects of the American shadow. He was able to channel a reckless, shadow-projecting anger and sense of entitled, macho self-assertion, making him the perfect trickster to seduce millions of people into taking a gamble on a failed casino operator. But I don't want to perceive this as an utterly dark thing, because living systems need shocks to stir up stagnant equilibria and stimulate development. Like the giant asteroid that hit the planet 65 million years ago that probably had the face of Donald Trump, on its topography. Bad for the dinosaurs, bigly bad, but, it was an opportunity for mammals to become the new winners eventually. Evolution can work through paradoxical means. Perhaps through ultimate buyer's remorse, some people will awaken to the hollowness of everything Trump represents. I found great solidarity forming between myself and people I had never met before that night as we shared in the communal shock. Also, we should remember that Hillary won the popular vote. This is the second time in 16 years that our disastrously stupid electoral college system has given us a candidate 1,000 shades of gray darker than the one more people voted for. On the hopeful side, we've had inferior personalities as presidents before and muddled through it. Trump is a bit of a shapeshifter, expertly reading the collective mood. He tuned into the dark feelings of disgruntled Americans, but now that he has actually been elected, Here comes some very naive optimism that I knew was unlikely at the time and has been since totally disconfirmed. Perhaps he will shape-shift again and become more reasonable to adapt to the radically new circumstances of actually being president. His victory speech was graceful and thoughtful. Let's hope it's a real signal of a willingness to act in ways that do not reflect everything we know about him. People who voted for him are going to have a long time to discover what their choice means and just how many, or more probably how few, of the promises Trump made will be delivered. It's good to empathize a bit with our fellow citizens' disappointment with the economic system that led them to such a poor choice. But it's also more than valid to call them out collectively on their stupidity. Again, one of those quotes I have to always refer to when talking about Trump, H.L. Mencken, saying, "No one ever went broke overestimating the crassness of the American people." Unlike Trump's ever-shifting promises, that decades-old statement seems like it's going to hold true for many years to come. But as I told some of my new Austinite friends last night, as individuals, our life mission doesn't have to change with the outcome of elections. My mission only seems more motivating and urgent than ever. No matter what happens, we should still be trying to do what we can to make the world a better place from the time we get up to the time we go to bed, one day at a time. As an introvert, I don't expect political developments to be the leading edge of evolutionary change. It's more likely to come from the weird effects on human consciousness of virtual reality and the creation of new visions in various media that may alter matrix source code more fundamentally. Psyche is the great danger, but also the great possibility as well. Change the psyche, and the politics and a great many other things will transform. So, if the Matrix gives you Trumpocalypse, then use secret alchemical means to create matrix-shifting Trumpocalyptic lemonade. Okay, the next one was written shortly after the election. I think I was traveling in Norway at the time. And it's called "You Are Living in a 3% Alternate Reality," dispatched from the Trumpocalypse number 2. MWI, or the Many Worlds Interpretation of Quantum Mechanics, created by physicist Hugh Everett in 1957, denies wave function collapse and tells us that in any probabilistic situation, all probable outcomes occur in separate timelines. In other words, the reason why Trump won the election, when his odds of doing so were only about 3%, is that he both won and lost, and we are living in the 3% timeline in which the much less likely event occurred. We are living in the far more improbable, inferior branch of this historic election outcome, and that is why so many of us feel a basic wrongness about the ensuing reality. In politics and in many other spheres of human activity, people are experiencing a profound loss of temporal momentum because we have been diverted into that 3% branch. Insiders tell us that the Trump campaign was expecting to lose well into Election Day Eve. Since his improbable victory, Trump has seemed subdued and not really himself, close aides report. They are also reporting a sense of unreality and of just going through the motions of an outcome even they cannot believe. Even people who are detached from politics are feeling a profound loss of temporal momentum because even though the world appears more or less the same, we are living in a much thinner probabilistic branch. Because the 97% branch we were diverted from has so much more temporal momentum and vitality, many people are sensing it and recalling memories of President-elect Clinton. Although not independently verified by Reality Sandwich, according to numerous leaked reports, at a number of scientific facilities, notably MIT and DARPA, hastily arranged experiments are underway to attempt communication and escape portals that theoretically at least would allow people in this branch to cross over to the 97% branch. Details of the protocols they are employing are classified and only a few hints have leaked out. Parabolic mirrors and fields of rotating nuclear magnetic resonance are apparently key elements. Others, at cognitive research facilities, are taking a more psychological, consciousness-based approach immersing volunteers in media-quarantined environments where simulated newscasts and news websites reports on the details of Clinton's election and possible cabinet choices, etc. So the idea is that if you believe in that enough, you may be able to slide over to the 97% branch. But what both the physical and psychological schools of branch connection agree on is that the window to communicate with or slide over to the Clinton branch, the 97% branch, is rapidly closing as the timelines continue to diverge moment by moment. The psychological school does hold out the possibility that talented individuals and groups with strong capacity for imagination and visualization may still succeed with informal efforts to slide over to the Clinton branch. Numerous such private efforts are underway on every continent, but especially in the United States. So far, however, no one has any convincing metrics on what degree of success or failure they are experiencing. Some have also challenged the ethics of those who are attempting to slide toward the Clinton branch before progressive divergence closes the window of opportunity. Some who think that sliding is possible nevertheless regard it as morally questionable since it involves abandonment of those left behind, like you and me, in the 3% timeline. There are also questions about possible disruptive paradoxes that sliding could cause. Would there be two versions of the slider in the Clinton branch, or would the slider simply merge with the version of themselves that diverged a few days ago? Without communication back from the Clinton branch, we have no way of knowing for sure. A more moral and useful stance toward the 3% branch, which some, including the author of this article, are advocating, is to accept and embrace the 3% Trumpocalyptic branch despite its intense feelings of improbability and profound wrongness. As an early proponent of this approach, I have been emphasizing the positive side of Trumpocalypse acceptance. The present sense of unreality and diminished temporal momentum is both a crisis and an opportunity. While our branch is still in this liminal, unformed state, those with strong visions of possible futures may never again have such a fertile opportunity to imprint this new branch with the seeds of new possibilities. Go then. There are other worlds than these. That's what the character Jake says as he falls into an abyss in Stephen King's Dark Tower series. To slide or not to slide. Even if you were able to seize the rapidly dwindling possibility of crossing over to the President-elect Clinton branch, you really don't know what is waiting for you over there. While accepting Trumpocalypse is a bitter pill, as hard to swallow as an orange comb-over glazed with layers of hairspray, it may actually be more moral than attempting to flee into counterfactual alternate timelines. If you have the strength to stay with the Trumpocalyptic branch, you may find a rare opportunity to work creatively with the most malleable and unformed collective timeline you have ever experienced. Go then. There are other worlds than these, but the most moral way out of this one is through. And your fellow 3%ers need people with the strength and vision to work with the Trumpocalypse without losing the vision and will to bring about evolutionary transformation. All right, next one is called Trump Promoting Fake News, a Cottage Industry for Macedonian Teenagers. And, of course, now we know a lot more about the fake news industry. And it begins with a quote. Not every quote attributed to a famous person is authentic, and not all the news you read online is credible. That was something Abraham Lincoln said. It's not just a notion that we live in a post-factual world. People are actually making a living selling post-factual news. Some of them are teenagers in Macedonia who, in a region where the average salary is $4,800, make up to $10,000 a month getting Google AdSense revenue, creating fake news for Trump supporters. And you can read an amazing story from NBC News. Fake news, how partying Macedonian teen earns thousands publishing lies. Just as people who eat a diet of artificially flavored food-like substances lose their appetite for real food, poorly educated folks who prefer red meat sound bites that confirm their prejudices favor spicy fake news. If you just ate a bag of Cool Ranch Doritos, you will probably want to get your daily fruit serving from a roll of tropical fruit flavor Starbursts, not an apple. Similarly, if you live on a diet of spiced up, non-factual sound bites, you're going to read, or may not even be able to read, nuanced, complex, fact-checked news articles. Facts have become so 2009, while false factoids have become the shiny new Bitcoin of the realm. Just in the last few days of the President-elect of the United States of America, has tweeted such obvious falsehoods as the claim that he won the Electoral College in a historic landslide. Actually, it was a comparatively narrow margin. And that he actually won the popular vote if you deduct the millions of people who voted illegally. To be fair, fact-adverse folk have been around in every era. But now, American appetite for news-like substances is getting so supersized that lie vendors, even teenagers in Macedonia, can live like rock stars off their desire to be deceived. Twin Horsemen of the Trumpocalypse, and the cover image shows a bare-chested Putin riding on a horse, and riding on the same horse, sitting behind him, is a bare-chested Donald Trump. Many years ago, when Putin first came to power, I had a nightmare about him. Worse than a merely scary nightmare, it was tragically poignant. I was feeling the devastation of specific victims of his murderous cruelty. My grandparents came to the USA to escape anti-Semitic persecution from this part of the world, Latvia and Ukraine and so forth. So perhaps some ancestral anxiety was being stirred up. My blood ran cold the very first time I laid eyes on an image of Putin. Even his name sounds horrifying. Hitler. Put in. As in to prove his masculinity, he put it in her. The last name also conjures the Yiddish word putz. Putin seems like a psychopath whose fear of inferiority has become a sadistic will to power. Jung had a name synchronicity theory. Putin is a putz, an inferiority determined to become a vampiric Vladimir, Vlad the Impaler. The other is Donald the Clown, born under the devil's lucky star to trump, to pull off unlikely and disastrous wins with the help of stacked decks. And those decks were stacked by bailouts from his dad, banks, bankruptcies, tax loopholes, and now free hacking by his devil daddy, Vladimir Putin. Trump never made my blood run cold, but he has been turning my stomach since the early 80s. Living in New York City, Trump was the dominant personification of greedy, inflated egoism in New York City before he became a fully national figure. Now 2 faces of the will-to-power complex seem to have converged. Behold the Janus-headed chimera of evil, the clown snake, Trump Putin. Based on his most recent and longest-ever press conference, even no-drama Obama seems to finally be losing his cool about the imminent danger of the 2 horsemen of the Trumpocalypse. Trump's anti-cabinet, a rogues gallery of low-budget Batman villains who are committed to destroying the agencies they're being put in charge of, is putting hideous faces on the disastrous consequences of this election. Add to that the election result being openly celebrated by Putin and Russian thugs who successfully put their bloody fingers on the scale. The same folks who have just made Aleppo a synonym for hell. Add the polling that shows that 37% of Republicans now have a favorable view of Putin, a result that is as horrifying and absurd as polling that shows a spike in cancer's favorability rating. When you add those things together, you have a blood pudding of gross stupidity and evil. You have a putrid but potent witch's brew of the most dangerous and inferior of human qualities waiting to manifest the nightmares lurking in the collective unconscious. And of course, there should have been a third person riding on the horse. If the horse could hold that much weight, it would have been that little rocket man, Kim Jong-un. But we are not powerless. When the people in the Department of Energy took the Trump campaign's witch-hunting 72-question questionnaire designed to expose anyone who takes climate change seriously and threw it back in the bully's face, the bully backed down and disavowed the questionnaire, absurdly claiming it was never authorized. When Obama confronted Putin face-to-face at a summit in September and told him to cut the election hacking, he backed down, at least temporarily. All that's necessary for the triumph of evil is for people who don't see grayscale, the pure folk who keep saying Republicrat and who couldn't see a difference between Gore and W, and an order of magnitude difference between the poison warning labels attached to Clinton and Trump, to continue to be stupidly indifferent and uncompromising, and for people who do see the difference to become paralyzed by the horror, and not stand up to the twin horsemen of the Trumpocalypse. To heavily paraphrase James Joyce, history is the nightmare from which we must work our asses off to wake up from. Okay, this is probably my best and certainly my most popular article on the Trumpocalypse. Take the red pill. Trumpocalypse reveals that you live in a simulated matrix. Does it feel like there is a Donald Trump-sized splinter in your mind you can't get out? Does it feel like this is the election that's been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth? Does the Trumpocalypse still seem unreal? In addition to getting at what the Trumpocalypse reveals about the nature of the Matrix, this one article will explain the evolution of life on this planet, all of history, and how you can hack the Matrix source code to have a successful life. It's time to wake up to the actuality that it isn't just a feeling or a metaphor. We actually do live in a reality show, a matrix whose source code has been written to favor story-intensifying plot developments and story-intensifying protagonists and antagonists. The evolution of life on this planet does not so much illustrate natural selection as manipulated story selection. This is close to what Terence McKenna meant when he said that the universe favors novelty. And by the way, if my tone sounds a bit whimsical and jokey and you think I must be kidding, think again. Even financial analysts at Bank of America say there is a 50% chance we are living in a simulated reality. You can Google that. They really said that. The jokey tone is for two reasons. One is because it's the holidays. The official start of the Trumpocalypse is 3 weeks from now. So I'm heavily sugarcoating the revelations. The second is, when you live in a story-centric matrix, it's crucial not to take what you or anyone else thinks too seriously, especially since reality itself is in a state of flux, and maybe to some extent fake news or a hoax. Let's begin by considering the cast of characters that populated this spherical island in space before central casting sent us to heighten the entertainment value of this matrix. Before the dinosaurs, the Earth was covered with tiny microbes, mainly bacteria. Bacteria are interesting microbes, highly adaptable, varied, and necessary for other life, so don't get me wrong, I like bacteria at least as much as the next guy. Respect. Got trillions of them living in my own body, and I take probiotics. To paraphrase Donald Trump, nobody has more respect for bacteria than I do. But let's face it, size does matter. Unless you're a microbiologist, the bacteria story is not something that can hold your attention past a certain point. For example, you probably haven't heard of anyone binge watching a cable series where all the characters are bacteria. Bacteria are awesome, they make great cultures, but from the story structure point of view, they're basically doing the same shit over and over and over again for billions of years. They serve practical purposes, and that's why after billions of seasons, their story is still going. But in the background, mainly as a nearly invisible supporting cast to the main players. The Earth story doesn't really get interesting until the dinosaurs come along. Put yourself in the perspective of future versions of us, or some more advanced ET species or AIs that have superseded us and use quantum computing or some other means to create matrices. Visionaries from many cultures and eras have recognized that there is a manipulative, illusion-generating species running our show. The Gnostics in the Nag Hammadi Library, nearly 2,000-year-old documents, improbably discovered in 1945, right at the end of our last apocalypse, World War II, spell it out for us, just as the Hindus and many other visionary cultures have. We live in Maya, which means matrix, an artificial realm of illusion. The Gnostics called the matrix masters the archons. Instead of saying Matrix Masters a million times, I will refer to these entities as archons. Please don't take that to infer anything too mystical. Technological materialists like Elon Musk believe the same thing, that there are intelligent entities, possibly just us in the future, who have developed quantum computing and are now running countless high-res, super-complex, avatar-filled, simulated realities like ours, what I call the Babylon Matrix. Similarly, thanks to a bit of off-the-shelf hardware called a fish tank, I run a simulated biosphere in my living room, and I've created it with air pumps and filters to create an artificially oxygenated aquatic environment populated by a dozen fish, maybe it's a couple dozen now, who live inside a glass box. And there's a photo there of my fish tank, an artificial matrix I set up in my living room for selfish entertainment reasons. I go to some trouble and expense to keep it running, but not because I am, as my fish might foolishly assume, a loving God who deeply cares about this particular community of a dozen fish living in a predator-free simulated Edenic reality I've created for them within nearly invisible glass walls. I act like a reliable and benign, divine covenant-bound God to my fish, and they probably assume I exist as a supporting entity there to bring them flake food twice a day. At this point in their evolution, they lack gnosis and are almost certainly clueless that my agenda is entirely selfish. The fish tank is in my house, not for the fish, but solely for my entertainment. For this reason, I choose colorful, interesting-looking fish, like glowfish and clownfish, the best characters I can cast to be in this little glass-walled matrix in the back of my living room. So let's say you've set up the Earth Matrix for similar reasons. Until the dinosaurs came along, your aquarium wasn't all that interesting to look at. There's only so long you can stare at a sphere covered with microbes and some trilobites crawling around on the bottom of oceans. Similarly, I'm not going to put up with an aquarium that only has algae growing in it, even though it would be much lower maintenance. The entertainment value of the Earth Matrix for the first billion years or so is maybe a 1 or a 2. But as soon as you evolve boring microbes into dinosaurs, gargantuan meat puppets with armor plating and giant jaws glistening with dozens of switchblades, or having epic fights to the death, your production values and entertainment factor have shot up to a 5 or 6. If your Archon household includes boys, like mine does, your Matrix is like an endlessly running Saturday morning cartoon show with all these cool-looking giant rock'em sock'em carnivorous meat puppets tearing each other apart. But after a while, the kids grow out of that, and the whole dinosaur story gets super repetitive. It was a cool series, renewed for millions of seasons, but eventually, every series runs its course and needs to get canceled to make way for more novel reality shows. So, quick intervention. You toss a smallish Manhattan-sized asteroid toward this little island in space, and the kinetic energy of it is so great that it basically, as Terrence put it, flattens anything larger than a chicken. Talk about a dramatic series finale. Then we get a few years of nuclear winter and chaos, a dramatic zone between series, and then, because we canceled the dinosaurs, we get a way more interesting story, a hot-blooded new series called The Mammals. Entertainment value is up to a solid 7. The cast of a million characters is way more varied and colorful and keeps evolving. And the series keeps running for millions of seasons, even though recently a lot of character types called species have gotten canceled because they are superfluous to the main storyline. After a while, the drama value of watching yet another saber-toothed tiger ripping apart yet another antelope or whatever becomes very same old, same old. The entertainment value of non-hominid mammalian species drops to about a 3. Today it's even lower. You can calculate this statistically by comparing the number of shows featuring all other mammals, nature shows in other words, versus shows predominantly featuring Homo sapiens, and it's probably like 3% or something. But you don't want to cancel on the mammals. Millions of years of evolution have created so much high production value natural scenery and all these colorful little muppets. Some of these mammals are warm and fuzzy and cute and almost Ewok-like, koala bears and pandas and whatnot. while other mammals are cool-looking stone-cold killers like tigers, and there's no need to waste all of that. So what you do is demote them to extras and supporting cast and gradually shift the storyline to these more complex, interesting creatures, the hominids. You keep evolving the hominids until you have two intertwined major species, the Neanderthals and the Homo sapiens. Eventually it becomes clear that the more vicious of these two hominid species, the Homo sapiens, have more story potential. So the Neanderthals get voted off the island, and you allow Homo sapiens to xenocide them to focus your matrix on the more story-intensifying species. At their best, Homo sapiens have brought the entertainment value of your matrix to an 8. But after a while, these Stone Age cultures who keep making the same stone axes for millennia and keep doing the same shit over and over with negligible cultural novelty get pretty boring. They had a good run, but after a while they seem so dated, so Pleistocene. So now it's time to send in the black monoliths and magic mushrooms and so forth and do some genetic engineering, a major wetware upgrade. You throw more processing power into their language centers, etc., so they can start making their own stories and become self-aware avatars, able to recognize the need for drama and novelty. Eventually, these upgrades result in a major new epic reality show called History. And History is a spectacle-filled, hot-blooded his story, a patriarchal great man theory, male character-based epic with over-the-top characters and spectacular battle scenes, and you name it, the novelty is endless. Now you've got a cast of artificially intelligent, slightly self-aware avatars who themselves recognize the need for drama and novelty, and the History show can mostly run itself, but you still tweak things and make interventions here and there. For example, nuclear weapons were this incredibly dramatic development of one of the most dramatic miniseries of all times called World War II. You let the avatars set off a couple of really small ones as a pyrotechnic miniseries finale. But after that, as your avatars start to develop more and more powerful nukes, you recognize that these are potential plot spoiler devices, the sort of MacGuffin that many plot lines can circle around, but that must never go off. For the first time in the History show, you allow 70 years to go by with a new sort of weapon not being used. You also allow multiple witnesses in both the U.S. and the Soviet Union to observe some of your interventions. UFOs appearing above nuclear missile silos and disabling launch codes. There's a link to articles about that in the article. You can look it up. Gradually, you're setting up the ultimate series finale called The Singularity, a Truman Show, Twilight Zone type denouement where your avatars are going to realize that they are avatars. And you can see my book, Crossing the Event Horizon, Human Metamorphosis and the Singularity Archetype. Meanwhile, you've got to keep things interesting and dramatic and even improbably dramatic so that your avatars eventually start to catch on and get the joke. But right now, we have a chance to get the joke sooner than the Archons want. All those billions of seasons of plot-enhancing developments in the Babylon Matrix have led right up to the present moment, the prequel we are in right now, just before the epic new series, the Trumpocalypse, takes over. This is before the inauguration. The Babylon Matrix has been running itself, driven along by this intelligent species of vicious drama queens, always turning out story-intensive product. The Archons get arrogant and negligent and allow any Archon to do whatever to this Matrix. And then, not very long ago, a bored Archon boy, a particularly juvenile and sadistic Archon boy who is probably quite a bit like an avatar boy of the sort that lives on Adderall and ultra-sour candy and who might, on some rainy afternoon, toss an M80 into his boring plastic ant farm to see what will happen, steps up to the Matrix control panel. As dramatic as History is, there aren't enough explosions and whatnot to hold this Archon boy's attention. So the boy starts this huge, high-stakes, high-novelty election in the only superpower nation of the Babylon Matrix, and it comes down to a choice between two lead characters. One is the most qualified, most politics-as-usual type, monotonous presidential candidate of all time, and the other is the world's most popular reality television star, the least qualified candidate of all time, an orange-colored, fire-breathing monster clown trickster named Donald Trump. Which of these sounds like the most story-intensifying character? But there's a slight problem. A majority of the avatars voting for the next lead character have been programmed with too much common sense and survival instinct, and actually prefer to vote for the drama-killing character. Polling has never been so sophisticated and accurate, and 100% of the polls predict the drama-killing character will win. What's a sadistic Archon boy to do? Well, now we know what he did. He named his meant-to-win trick card character Trump, and with the worst kind of heavy-handed deus ex machina manipulation, he gives him an electoral college trick win, which every poll said was impossible. And now, all the sensible avatars, the sort of ones who voted for no drama Obama, are frustrated and know they've been tricked somehow. But lots of these folks are a bit naive. For example, a lot of them still stubbornly cling to facts. They just don't realize how stupid it is to cling to facts when you live in a fiction-based matrix. This is why the Oxford Dictionary's word of the year is post-truth. Get it? Truman is starting to catch on. Time to wake up and smell the juvenile archonic source code, sheeple. The facts are just a bunch of temporary data points that any Archon boy can shift at any moment for story purposes. Story-intensifying fiction trumps boring facts every time. You can drive yourself and everybody crazy whining about carbon and climate change, and meanwhile, anytime it served a story purpose, this Archon boy could just set off a supervolcano and throw us into nuclear winter. All your sensible, fact-based climate change worry will just make you look stupid at that point, and you're just baiting Archon Jr. to trigger Yellowstone, or maybe another giant asteroid or whatever, just so he can make what you assumed was the factual story blow up in your face. In general, if you want to succeed in a fiction-based matrix, then be the best reality show star you can be, not a fact-based dinosaur. More about this winning strategy momentarily. So, to recap, an obviously heavy-handed and immature Archon designs an orange monster clone trickster avatar to be an improbable winner. In an over-the-top wink at the Avatar Collective, he even names him Trump, which actually means a winning trick card. Get it? The Archon in charge of this matrix is giving you a huge Negan of the Walking Dead, we both know I'm just fucking with you smirk. Trump is as over-the-top obvious a character name as Cruella de Vil. Get some subtlety, Archon Jr. I don't mind living in a story, but these names are killing me. Why does it have to be such a cartoonish allegory? I get the joke already. Can you please stop giving Republican antagonist avatars over-the-top names like Newt Gingrich, Rush Limbaugh, Dick Armey, Tom DeLay, Trent Lott, and of course, head of the RNC, key Trump ally, and soon to be his chief of staff, Reince Priebus. Who are you kidding? What mother who is not part of an extraterrestrial bat species names their kid Reince Priebus? You're just fucking with us and these ridiculous names. But who am I to talk when I was born with the last name Zapp? I get the joke. I am the avatar that some subtler Archon sent to zap the collective by finally putting the red pill in the center of a jokey, candy-coated reality sandwich. So even though I have just offered the single most crucial revelation ever created, this is also the most humble day of my life. Like Trump, I too am a pre-programmed avatar meant to play a specific story-intensifying function which I have hereby performed. But if I play my role just right, if I'm able to get all of you to make this article go viral, I will have played my role too well for Archonic purposes. Too many avatars will have their Truman Show awakening and get the joke, and the Trumpocalyptic storyline will have to shift or risk a loss of novelty. This is why I said I'm optimistic. We are smarter than they think we are, and they allowed the dumbest of Archons to come up with this ridiculous Trumpocalypse storyline. The Archonic fingerprints on the Trumpocalypse miniseries are clearly the ultra-sour, candy-smeared fingers of an attention-deficited, dumbed-down, sadistic Archon boy who probably gets bullied by other Archon boys and is tossing in Donald Trump like an M80 into an ant farm. The ridiculously over-the-top Trumpocalypse story is clearly not the product of the sharpest Archon in the Archon shed. A mature puppet master doesn't let the strings show. No well-educated, mentally stable adult archon would pull such a juvenile stunt. And that's why I'm an optimist about this situation and think that what looks apocalyptic is actually an opportunity to get a critical number of avatars to wake up within the Babylon Matrix so that we can fundamentally hack the source code. I'm about to put my life in danger by revealing the hack that allows me to live an improbably magical life. It disgusts me to admit this, but it is essentially the same hack that Trump is using, only mine is hampered by ethical standards. I have always lived an improbable, magical life, even though, except for the last couple of years, the most money I've had access to is a school teacher's salary. I just turned 59, an age when life is supposed to be boring, and yet I've traveled to 25 countries in 2016, see my Facebook albums, and even though I'm an introverted, cranky, weird, and increasingly old white guy, I continue to be surrounded by interesting young friends, amazing synchronicities, dreams, and visions happen daily, and whatever happens to be going through my head gets instantly published on Reality Sandwich. Early on, I learned a source code hack I can tell you in 5 words, and it's not the power of positive thinking or new age bullshit like the secret of YCYOR, you create your own reality. If you don't want to know the source code hack to lead a magical life, stop listening now. Here it is. Be a story-intensifying character. If you make yourself into a story-intensifying character and can get yourself onto a story-intensifying timeline, Matrix source code will recognize that and open doors for you, throw other story-intensifying principal characters your way, and adjust any recalcitrant facts to allow your story to create novelty. Another avatar about my age who tapped into this simple hack was Steve Jobs. Everyone talked about how Jobs created a reality distortion field, as they called it, around himself. He was a narcissist and an asshole to most of the people around him, but he was a story-intensifying character, so the Matrix bent around him. Does Donald Trump keep winning because he's smart, as he so often tells us? Is it because he's going to replace everything with something terrific? Is it because no one has more respect for women than he does? Is it because he was more fact-wielding than Hillary Clinton? No, he won because he was the most improbable story-intensifying avatar who possibly could have become president. Duh. It should be obvious, people. If Napoleon was a perfect 10 on the history series story-intensifying character scale, Donald Trump is an 11. In case you still don't get it, I'll give you an obvious example of how the story-intensifying source code works. Donald Trump is the world's most successful and famous reality television star. When did the modern reality television era begin? It began with the first season of Survivor, which played out in the year 2000, the year we were supposed to get an apocalyptic revelation. The creators of the show were Archon-inspired and controlled, and they set up this reality show matrix within the reality show matrix using the exact same archonic source code that runs the outer Babylon matrix. Characters were voted off the island based not on their knowledge of facts or high ethics, but according to who intensified the story. Trump survived the 16-person clown car of the Republican nominating process because he was by far the most colorful of the clowns. Who of the 16-member tribe won the first season of Survivor? The colorful, manipulative, man you love to hate, immoral asshole, Richard Hatch. Get it? The nice guy doesn't win. It isn't about who is the good guy or the bad guy. It's about who is story intensifying and who isn't. A danger in revealing this hack is that it is amoral. It will promote the timeline of epic assholes as well as outlier saints. I make every effort to use this hack in ethical ways that accord with my values, and I hope that you will use it to promote love-based timelines and not hate and power-based ones, but that's up to you. If I were willing to wear body armor and a breath mask and use uncanny charisma and the force lightning technique to assist me, especially with a last name like Zap, I would probably end up conquering star systems. I would get far more Matrix resources because that would make me such a story-intensifying avatar. But for ethical reasons, I'm just not willing to go there. By the way, I have actual Sith ancestors, and the Sith are a peace-loving, ethically bound species, though Archon propaganda, in other words, the Star Wars films, would have you think the opposite. And you can see my writings on actual Sith culture, which are up on my website and on Reality Sandwich. Darth Vader is by far the most story-intensifying Star Wars character, and without him, the franchise would be worth nothing. Vader is the one character somewhere in every film, while boring good guy type generic characters get anonymously dismembered by his red lightsaber and nobody cares. Al Gore and Hillary Clinton got more votes, but got dropped from the story because they were too much like Jar Jar Binks. They knew way more facts than their opponents, already a fatal flaw. And in general, they were way too story deadening and annoying in a banal way to carry 48 seasons as the lead character. Would anyone have kept watching Star Wars if the big reveal was that Jar Jar Binks was Luke's father? Donald Trump is essentially using the same hack I use, but unencumbered by ethics. He has created an anti-cabinet consisting of a bunch of low-budget Batman villains who are committed to destroy the very departments they will take over. Horrible, but story-intensifying. He actually talks about central casting, and freely admits that he picks supporting characters, even Secretary of State, largely because they, quote, look the part. Trump knows that fiction trumps fact, and that with an outrageously counterfactual 50-character tweet, he can stir up the whole world. He gets exponentially more resources from the Matrix than I do, giant towers, private jets, and helicopters, and now the keys to a superpower because I allow myself to be boringly bound by ethics while Trump is the engine of novelty every story, every reality show series needs, a love-to-hate him, break all the rules, trickster antagonist. Trump is essentially a Gnostic master gone rogue. He gets the joke. He was sent by the Archons, central casting in other words, to do exactly what he is doing. He is following the Tao, the archonic source code, more perfectly than any avatar in the history of the world. However, if enough of us avatars who have story-intensifying capacity and ethics start hacking the source code, we can shift everything. The Archons may have made a crazy, bloodthirsty drama queen species, but they also made us just a bit more self-aware than intended, and they let the most foolish of their children generate the Trumpocalypse, a contrived miniseries anyone can see through. They focused everything on the Trump avatar, and so far haven't noticed that the Zap avatar might be doing his job a little too well. So, assuming I can get this out there on the internet before some Matrix agent with a nasal, over-enunciated monotone starts interrogating me or pulls me from the Matrix like they just did to Princess Leia, who's only a year older than me, I'm going to share with you the most powerful source code hacks I've learned. The complete collection is to be found on my website, zaporacle.com, where you also find my free Matrix shifting 664 card oracle, the Zap Oracle, a red pill oracle that reconfigures itself to accord with each moment of consultation. The first hack, once again, is to shift Matrix resources towards you by being a story-intensifying character. Read about story structure, such as the book Story by screenplay guru Robert McKee. For example, one principle of screenplay writing is that in every scene, something of high value should be at stake. I adapt this to my life by mostly refusing to engage in any small talk. Mundane dialogue does not shift the Matrix. I'm an introverted, well entertained in my own inner world. If I'm going to take myself out of that world to talk to someone, I insist that something of high value be at stake in the conversation. You also need to mythologize your life. Mythologize it in a healthy way. See Jungian psychology. Arnold Toynbee, the British historian who analyzed the life cycle of civilizations, discovered that civilizations fell when they no longer had a healthy ruling myth. The source code supports avatars who devote themselves to highly meaningful and interesting mythic life missions, but also darkly mythic ones too. Anyone rich in meaning will be given more of it, and anyone who says they are bored, who lacks meaning and motivation, is doomed. Here's the central line of source code running this matrix. To those whose story is intensifying, give more. From those whose story is dwindling, take away what little they have. This line of code is actually revealed in the Bible, Matthew 13:12, where it says, "To he who has much, much more will be given, and to he who has little, even that little will be taken away." On the dark side, greedy but highly motivated story-intensifying avatars use this code to create massively unequal wealth distribution. Don't let your ego make absolute judgments about what's good and bad. Dark forces are needed for novelty. A story writer is a matrix maker. And if you had to write a story about a character who will develop spiritually, you will be obliged to create darkness and antagonists to spur character and story development. Tolkien's Ring trilogy is a story with ultimate development, the shifting of ages. If you took away Sauron, Saruman, ring wraiths, orcs, etc., you'd have a stagnant matrix, hobbits going out on dates with other hobbits and have second and third breakfasts or whatever, and that would be really boring. There'd be no development. See my article, Tolkien and the Developmental Need for Evil. Evolution works by paradox. Here's a quick example. There's one person who has been more of an evolutionary catalyst of the psychoactive potential of the marijuana plant than anybody else alive or dead. Who is it? The answer is our last entertainer turned president, Ronald Reagan. Reagan intensified the war on drugs. Incarceration skyrocketed while his wife Nancy preached "just say no" across the country. The border with Mexico was made harder to cross, diminishing the flow of cheap swag. This created great economic opportunity for domestic grow-ops. Zero-tolerance policies encoded penalties based on plant numbers and weight. You had the same risk if you grew low-quality weed as you did if you grew far more profitable per pound super potent, super dank weed. With lots of black market money coming in, growers kept working their genetics to make weed many times more potent than it was a few decades before. The attempt to oppress something often makes it stronger. Or as Princess Leia, who died today, may the Force ease her passing, put it, "The more you tighten your grip, Tarquin, the more star systems will slip through your fingers." So Trumpocalypse could actually turn out to be a giant evolutionary catalyst. It could be right this second for you if it enlightens you to how the Matrix source code works. The Matrix works based on what I call dynamic paradoxes. Here's a link to my most powerful Matrix source code hack. Well, you can just Google it. It's called dynamic paradoxicalism. The anti-ism ism, but just dynamic paradoxicalism will probably be enough to bring it up. Finally, the Archons overplayed their Trump hand. They became so arrogant and lazy that they allowed a foolish, archonic child to put up a storyline too absurd for anyone with open eyes to believe. I've done what I can by candy coating this red pill and putting it into a high word count but easy to swallow reality sandwich. Now it's up to you to take it and distribute it. Use the hacks I've given you. Use them ethically, and most important, before you do anything else, put this article up on your social media. Post it to everyone's Facebook timeline. Please remember, all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people not to repost this article. If not you, who? If not now, when? Repost this. Repost it now, or the Archons have already won. Okay, I had to take a break after I discovered that a whole lot of stuff I recorded did not record. And while I was doing that and went for a little walk, I was listening on my phone to the news where the Trump tax cut, mostly for big corporations, and that's going to have long-term consequences, is just about to get passed. It's about to get passed by the House and probably by the Senate tonight. So the Trumpocalypse is an unfolding story. That's why this is called Dispatches from the Trumpocalypse. It's not a summation of it looking back from the future. Hopefully that will be a vantage point available to us soon, one hopes. And the speaking of the amateurish of amateur quality of this recording and doing this by myself, I spend far more money creating these products like this Dispatches of the Trumpocalypse, which is really people have suggested, like Daniel Pinchbeck, why not put this all together and sell it as a book? And I'm just too busy developing original content to try and do something like that. That's probably not going to work all that well anyway. But if you would like to make a donation to the ZapOracle.com website, that would be gratefully appreciated. And it's very easy to do. Anyway, so this is part 2 of the Red Pill. It's a follow-up article to the article I just read you called Take the Red Pill Exegesis. And it's a more serious follow-up to Take the Red Pill. Trumpocalypse reveals that you live in a simulated matrix. And in it, I will discuss who or what the archons or matrix masters might actually be, and also my methods of inquiry. I grew up in a highly intellectual family with both parents trained in scientific methodology and critical thinking. But sometime during adolescence, I realized that probing into the world with such left hemisphere-weighted tools was not going to be sufficient for me, and not in all areas at least. To paraphrase the famous quote attributed variously to J.B.S. Haldane or Arthur Eddington, I realized that reality was not only stranger than I thought and that other people think, but that it's also stranger than we can think. For my vision not to keep hitting walls, I knew I had to blend intuition, imagination, and critical thinking. Although the terms skeptic and skeptical have been co-opted by debunkers who are true believers in negative absolutisms, the skeptics were originally a school of Greek philosophers who believed that their powers of observation and thinking were enhanced by not arriving at conclusions. The true skeptical approach is probably the wisest approach if you want to go down rabbit holes and not get tricked. If you already think you know, and by the way, I just gave a talk at the Boulder XO on this subject. It was called Rabbit Hole Navigation. Our skills of rabbit hole navigation in an age of metamorphosis. I don't have the audio quality was terrible for that. I will re-record that and look for that online in the near future. If you already think you know the answer, confirmation bias and the trickster aspect of the unconscious will help you to be a naive true believer. As Terence McKenna pointed out, those who say the most usually know the least. In ufology, for example, the people who have the deepest insight have usually not come to any fixed conclusions about who the visitors really are. I'm talking about people like Jacques Vallée and Whitley Strieber, while those who know the least can tell you the names of everyone on the Palladian High Council. In paranormal research, for example, if something paranormal occurs, say I predict keys will fall off a table in 5 seconds, and they do, it's almost impossible to say what paranormal thing occurred. Did I do it with telekinesis? Was I clairvoyant, foreseeing that in the near future some other force would cause the keys to fall off? Did I use mind pressure to cause someone else with telekinetic powers to cause the keys to fall off? And we can keep populating the list, and we can't actually disconfirm any of those possibilities. Similarly, the Trumpocalypse has weird patterning suggestive of something paranormal at work, but there are multiple explanations, and we can't fully falsify or exclusively credit any one of them. But we also can't deny the weirdness, and that the weirdness indicates another level than conventional causality. For example, bracketing the Orlando shooting, I'm talking about the one that happened in 2016, that was had the highest body count of any shooting, something like 49, until the Las Vegas shooting just a few months ago. And there were two other bizarre, dark occurrences in Orlando, very close to where that shooting happened, each of them leading national news, and all occurring within a few days, and no one consciously planned them to all line up in this constellation. I wrote about that in an article you can Google, The Orlando Shooting, part of a window zone of evil. Bizarre and often fatal constellations of events often surround movies that powerfully evoke occult darkness, and I wrote about that, and this is also another YouTube, and it's called The Batman Shootings and Crossover Effects. There are different ways one can go down rabbit holes. Jung felt that if you sought to explore the unconscious without having a strong moral stance, you would likely be destroyed. Tribal shamans don't travel into the hidden realms to have a psychedelic thrill ride. They know they are entering dangerous domains, and usually do so for the purpose of healing an ailing person. They generally try to get in and out as quickly and safely as they can. One can try to plunge into a rabbit hole in a spacesuit, bristling with sensors, trying to remain objective while your mind is getting blown. One can plunge in with a tie-dye shirt and 100 tabs of acid in your gut and get perma-fried. One can plunge in for narcissistic or thrill-seeking purposes and get possessed and inflated by the highly energetic and trickster nature of the unconscious, so that you emerge as a demented prophet, a charlatan, or abusive guru on a self-serving messianic mission to spread your psychic contagion. I employ different balances of thinking and intuition during different rabbit hole excursions, and also use different blends of right and left hemisphere tools when I report back on what I've encountered. Sometimes I will emphasize critical thinking and the scholarly voice, such as in my book, Crossing the Event Horizon, Human Metamorphosis and the Singularity Archetype. While other times I may use a more surreal approach. Sometimes I found myself switching midstream. For example, a few years ago I wanted to look behind the curtain into the nature of money, and started out in analytical mode for a few paragraphs, and then got pulled by the muse into an increasingly surreal vision and rant, and that one is called Green Energy Vortex. If you check my section on Reality Sandwich, you'll see I've written, at least at the time I wrote this article, there were several after, 17 articles so far in the 2016 election. A few are soberly analytical and journalistic, but more of them involve sarcasm and surreality. I think they've been weighed toward the surreal because even before Trump won the nomination, I sensed weirdness erupting from the collective unconscious. Sometimes it is better to enter rabbit holes unencumbered by facts. Scientific methodology, journalistic responsibility, and other such tools are affectations of objectivity. When it is not morally hazardous, I sometimes employ a chaos magic practice I call interpretive magic. I use mythologizing interpretive latitude to create meaning and motivation out of things and events a materialist would explain via randomness and mechanical causality. And you can see an oracle card I wrote called Interpretive Magic for more on that. In other cases, such an approach would be morally unacceptable. For example, if I were a juror on a murder trial, then facts, rigorous reality testing, rules of evidence, chains of custody, and other such grounded and concrete tools must take precedence, while right hemisphere tools like free associative thinking, interpretive latitude, and mythologizing would be irresponsible methods. Where it does not appear to be morally hazardous, however, I like to sometimes blur the line between the factual and the imaginal. This line is a permeable membrane anyway, and when we are looking into weirdness, and there is a lot of weirdness in human affairs, we are looking at phenomena where various lines, especially the line between the inner psychic world and the outer world of physical events, is blurred in the phenomena itself. The Trumpocalypse is a zone of heightened weirdness, and I've tried to probe into it with both my astronaut suit and my festival clothes. So in Take the Red Pill, I was letting the muse pull me into a rabbit hole, and I used humor and other means to blur the line between rational assertion and surrealized associations. The paranormal, as my friend George Hansen discusses in his seminal book, The Trickster and the Paranormal, is governed by the trickster archetype. And so often the paranormal tricks and possesses people who seek to investigate it, turning seekers into rubes and charlatans. Pretensions of high objectivity seem to bait trickster forces, while I find that by consciously engaging a bit of trickster methodology myself, it can sometimes allow me to proceed further down a particular rabbit hole. To read more about my approach to reality testing and paranormal occult research, you can see some of my essays, podcasts, YouTube's Reality Testing is Politically Incorrect, and Carnival 2012, the 2012 Phenomenon, and the 22 Pitfalls and Blind Spots of Esoteric Research, and also the upcoming Rabbit Hole Navigation Skills in an Age of Metamorphosis, which will be a YouTube, I imagine. So now that I've given a thumbnail explanation of my highly variable methods, I will put on a very informal, scholarly outfit for a little bit. Apply a dust carefully vacuumed from the tweed jacket with elbow patches to talk as sensibly as I can for a few paragraphs about who the archons or matrix masters might be. First, we should discard what I call the single correct diagnosis fallacy, where we assume that there is only one objectively true explanation of every phenomenon. We live in a novelty-creating, incredibly varied, and complex cosmos. Look at the fantastic variety of forms just in the micro and macro biological realm of carbon-based life. When we remove the need for organic chemistry and consider life based on zeros and ones and various other subtler, more etherealized and plastic substrates, the thought-responsive, idioplastic realms of the imaginal, the spirit world, the dream time, etc., then the cryptozoology of life forms inhabiting such realms should be expected to be exponentially more varied and weird than carbon-based organisms. Consider how large would be the encyclopedia of all dream creatures, for example. So when we look at the hidden causes of Trumpocalypse, we are more likely to find a multitude of agents and agencies than, say, an individual ADD Archon boy behind a control panel. One general possibility, close to the perspective I adopted in Take the Red Pill, is that there are hidden species above us on the food chain that are using us as a harvest, experiment, entertainment, or whatever. Visionaries and experiencers from many cultures and periods give testimony to there being hidden species interpenetrating the human domain, and much of the testimony points toward parasitic species. You can find my full collection of writings about what I call mind parasites in the mind parasite category of zaporacle.com. There you'll see a drop-down, like telescope-looking menu at the top, and you just hit category, and you'll see that category, and many articles there. There are two articles that relate closely to the Gnostic texts about the archons, Alex Gray and the mind parasites. That's a YouTube, and a Gnostic view of mind parasites. I'll just make a few quick points to put the idea of hidden species in a rational perspective. 1. Wherever we find life, we find parasites, predators, and symbionts. These are classic relationships of energetic transaction. 2. It is possible for people who regard themselves as well-informed to fail to notice an entire dimension of life. 3. When a culture, such as that of scientific materialism, ignores a vast body of human testimony, that culture is in danger. For example, Western culture ignored or denied testimony about child abuse until recently. You should neither accept all testimony at face value, nor dismiss or superficially explain it away. The job of science and other methods of inquiry is to investigate the unexplained, not explain the uninvestigated. Here is an excerpt from my introductory essay on the subject, which should really be your starting point if you wanted to pursue this. Mind parasites, energy parasites, and vampires. Not too long ago, not much more than 300 years, our species was completely clueless about the microbiological realm. It was not until 1674 that a Danish shopkeeper, really practically a janitor, developed the first microscope capable of resolving protozoa. Surgeons would wash their hands after surgery, but not before. Imagine if anyone had claimed that there were these incredibly tiny animals, too small to be seen, that were major players in human destiny. Imagine if they claimed that there wasn't just one kind, but a whole cryptozoology of millions of strange species, fantastically varied, both plant and animal. Imagine if they further claimed that our bodies were actually made up of a cooperative colony of 60 trillion such animals. Anybody making such fantastical claims would have been condemned to a lunatic asylum or burned at the stake. Presently in the West, we have a blind spot and by West I really mean the modern world, the modern materialist age of scientism. We have a blind spot in our awareness as huge as the species-wide blind spot we had for most of our existence about the microbiological realm. Unlike Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, and what would be common knowledge to any tribal shaman, we are blind to organisms that exist on the energetic plane. Dr. Samuel Sagan is a medical doctor who has researched this subject and written a book entitled Entities, Parasites of the Body of Energy, and you could read my review of this book called Energy Parasites, The Sagan View. He's part of a school in Australia that a friend of mine attended and spoke highly of, though I know next to nothing about it. It's called the Clarivision School, I think. In an excerpt available on the website clarivision.org, though, Dr. Sagan writes, "The topic is both old and new. Old because in all traditions and folklores of the earth, one finds references to spirits and non-physical beings which can interfere with human beings. Thus, Ayurveda, the traditional medicine of India, is divided into 8 sections, one of which is entirely devoted to the study of bhutas, or entities, their influence on health and sanity, and the ways one can get rid of them. This places Bhuta Vidya, or science of entities, on the same level as surgery or gynecology. If we look at traditional Chinese medicine, we find that in acupuncture, among the 361 points of the 14 main meridians, 17 have the word Kuei for disincarnate spirit as part of their main or secondary name." And now this is me writing again. "Call them spirits, incubi, and the succubi. Buddhists call them pretas, or hungry ghosts. They have as many names as there are cultures and languages, but they have been widely recognized by everybody except us, and by us, of course, I mean modern materialism. Disincarnate organisms are far more generally recognized than the microbiological realm ever was until the invention of the microscope. And there isn't just one type, of course, but a fantastically varied cryptozoology of parasites, predators, and symbionts. Everywhere that we find life, we find endless variations on those classic energetic relationships: parasitism, predation, and symbiosis. As the alchemist put it, as above, so below. As it is on the microbiological plane, so it is also on the energetic plane. If there are organisms on the energetic plane, we should expect to find many highly evolved species of parasites. And what every parasite is looking for is a host with a rich deposit of energy, like the warm-blooded mammals, which attract female mosquitoes that will use them to fertilize their eggs and complete their life cycle. What is the richest deposit of organic energy that we know of? This would have to be human psychic energy and sexual chi, the energy that dominates this planet. So yes, I do believe it is possible that there are, scare quotes, archons of some sort or of many sorts who may be manipulating the human domain for various purposes. An overlapping possibility is that we may be living in a simulated reality created by hidden entities or forces. And you could read, this is the best wiki page I've ever read, Simulated Reality in Wikipedia. The movie The Matrix, which so greatly amplified the simulated reality possibility in collective consciousness, was inspired by Gnosticism. Since I'm not a materialist, I don't find the possibility that we are living in a simulated reality to be particularly disconcerting. In a deleted scene from the fantasy epic I am writing, Parallel Journeys, one character asks another, "What does anything matter if we are living in a simulation?" The other responds, and once again, this is a deleted scene. I wouldn't write this way now. I think it matters, even if it is a simulation. There are physicists publishing papers about the possibility that we are living in a quantum computer simulation, but I don't think it matters that much what we're made of. Probability waves, superstrings, quantum computer-generated matrix source code, it's all just the stuff that dreams are made of. And dreams are as real as anything else. Anything that exists is real. Any dream you have ever had, any thought or image or fantasy that flits through your mind has a factual existence. You thought of that particular thing and no other. The history of the unfolding of the multiverse has to include the fact that you had that particular thought at that moment. If we are composed of zeros and ones generated by alien quantum computers, then the pattern of zeros and ones is real. A simulation is as real as anything else because it exists. What also feels real to me is that things we do have moral consequences. Hair-splitting logic can't prove anything, but I feel that we are both self-aware entities, and how we act toward each other is more meaningful than what sort of stuff we are made of. End quote from a deleted scene from Parallel Journeys. Finally, I wanted to briefly discuss a matrix-creating force that I am not skeptical about because I know it exists. It is not, however, mutually exclusive of the other possibilities mentioned. A more potent force in generating human realities than the archons, even if they do exist, are the archetypes. And there's an interesting connection between those two words, archon and archetype. What Jung called the collective unconscious and the archetypes are an empirically proven reality. And this is an excerpt from my book, Crossing the Event Horizon, the Singularity Archetype and Human Metamorphosis. Jung and his colleagues have provided us with definitive evidence of a collective unconscious. From this collective layer of the unconscious emerged the great primordial images Jung referred to as the archetypes. Archetypes, according to Jung, are innate universal psychic dispositions that form the substrate from which the basic themes of human life, and that's individual or collective human life, emerge. Across cultures and periods, we find endless variations of these archetypes, such as the self, the persona, the shadow, the hero, the great mother, the trickster, the devil, and so forth. The archetypes may manifest in anyone, but often show up most vividly in the fertile psyches of artists, poets, mystics, writers, shamans, and prophets. Through such individuals, the archetypes become myths and diffuse throughout a culture. Edward Edinger, a Jungian analyst who wrote eloquently about the nature of archetypes, points out that although we can study archetypes as patterns, they are also living dynamic agents. In other words, they are subjects like us, not objects, or merely patterns. Donald Trump is a classic personification of the trickster archetype. The trickster is transgressive and violates expected boundaries and hierarchies. Tricksters are great at getting attention and are not bound by facts or logic. Archetypes possess enormous primordial energy, so someone possessed by an archetype may be imbued with uncanny charisma and messianic zeal. They often experience enormous ego inflation. They may also be surrounded by a reality distortion field with heightened synchronicities, including synchronistic names, and you can Google Jung's name synchronicity theory. The archetypes and the collective unconscious are a superpotent reality generating force-shaping human personalities and culture. Jung, in his book Flying Saucers, A Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Sky, wondered if the UFOs might not be physical exteriorizations of the collective unconscious. And you can see the ufology chapter of my book, Crossing the Event Horizon. In the classic 1956 science fiction film Forbidden Planet, an advanced alien species called the Krell were destroyed by technology they created to enhance their minds. The device also amplified their unconscious minds and unleashed monsters from the id. It was a very Freudian story, and also somewhat based on Midsummer Night's Dream. If you substitute the collective unconscious for the Krell hardware, you can easily explain the 2016 election and ensuing Trumpocalypse. You don't need Krell technology, archons, or simulated realities to explain eruptions of weirdness into the phenomenal world, but that does not discount them either. You don't need that because the way archetypes in the collective unconscious works. There's enough to explain it, in other words. The conventional view of the archons or other matrix masters does tend to be rather anthropomorphizing, because we're sort of postulating some kind of egos with manipulative agendas, which sounds pretty anthropomorphic. It is quite similar to the conspiracy view of human affairs, a view that my late colleague Terence McKenna referred to as epistemological cartoons. And you can see my wildly unpopular YouTube called Problems with the Conspiratist Worldview. It's attracted more hate response than anything else I've produced. Obviously, there are conspiracies, but what Terence and I are criticizing is the idea that any group of human conspirators can control the world, which Terence describes as like trying to control a dream. Any informed person with intact reality testing ought to be able to observe that we live in a world of competing spheres of power, not one run by a single power center. You just can't look at the competition between Samsung and Apple and between, North Korea and all these different spheres of power and think that there's one group of human puppet masters controlling everything. But the Archon variation merely locates the main conspirators offstage and allows them to be non-human. But that doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just that we need to be extra wary about projection when our explanatory model looks so anthropomorphic. But that can still be legit if the Archons are another version of human beings in a different part of the life cycle, for example. The collective unconscious is a matrix, and its ability to manifest itself in the human domain is massively evidenced and empirically proven. While other exotic forces, entities, and levels of reality are likely also in play, we should begin by recognizing the highly permeable membrane between psyche and the realm of outer phenomena. Everything economic, war, man-made environmental destruction, and the Trumpocalypse, these are all 100% psychological products of the psyche. As Jung put it, there is no hydrogen bomb in nature. Heard me say it before. This is all man's doing. We are the great danger. Psyche is the great danger. As a character in the movie Dazed and Confused put it, where are the aliens, man? We're the savages. When we gaze into the nuclear depths of the Trumpocalypse, we may find that Psyche is the matrix master and that the Archons exist and are to be found in our own hidden depths. For the most sophisticated and comprehensive view of the paranormal I've ever encountered in a single volume, I highly recommend Supernatural, a new vision of the unexplained by my friend Jeffrey Kripal, professor of religion at Major University, and Whitley Strieber. And here's and then I talk again about the Walter Trump thing there, but you've already heard that. Okay. So, now a more sober and thoughtful article. Let's see. If not Trump, you. A dream on the morning of the inauguration. I woke up at 2:30 a.m. on January 20th, 2017, with a dream about the Trump inauguration, now only a few hours away. I'm seeing Trump on the parade ground, or perhaps I am seeing himself on the parade ground in a black overcoat. As in the waking life, I'm feeling the shock of his imminent inauguration, but I'm also seeing things from his perspective. His emotions seem little boy-like. He is nervously anticipating being honored, but also fearing public humiliation. He may be upset that he was unable to get A-list talent to perform at the inaugural ball. He doesn't seem scary, doesn't seem like a leader, obviously. He seems, in a sympathetic way, more immature and needy. The dream parallels a vision I had about Trump during an ayahuasca ceremony a few months ago. And you can see my account of that. Google the article, The Agonizing Enlightenment of Ayahuasca. I think it's on my website and on Reality Sandwich. In both dream and Aya vision, he is revealed to be immature, but not irredeemably bad. There is some confused intention to do good. He wants people to be proud of him. I am perceiving Trump's state of mind from the first floor of a house that is undergoing some sort of renovation. The place is a mess, covered with debris from the renovation process. I feel like the work is being done irresponsibly somehow, and that I will be forced to clean up the mess. An older workman who seems competent, professional, humble, and reliable comes by and addresses my concern. No, he says. We take charge of cleaning up everything. When I woke up, and that's the end of the dream, when I woke up, the workman seemed like one of the helpers within the collective unconscious, a personification of some sort of autonomic self-regulatory force working invisibly beneath the surface. The dream left me still feeling a bit of impending Trumpocalyptic inauguration shock, but also strangely reassured. A messy process of renovation was occurring that looked chaotic and irresponsible, but was actually under intelligent control. The intelligent control, of course, had nothing to do with Trump. The Donald was more like a little boy caught up in a process much larger than himself and beyond his understanding. He was only seeing things from the perspective of his needy identity. He was not in the house being renovated or even remotely aware of it. The renovation process was going on in parallel to the inauguration, but was entirely separate from his ego awareness or control. The reassurance was that there were helpful, competent, humble forces that were working with the process responsibly. I agree with Jung that dreams should not be taken as the word of God. For all I know, this dream could be about my own inner workings, and I am misinterpreting it to have any outer meaning. No one dream theory can account for all dreams. Dreams are infinitely varied and can serve any number of functions. This could be a wish fulfillment dream to help me deal with my anxiety about the inaugural. I'm just sharing the infinite subjectivity of my interpretation of my dream, and I'm making no prophetic or predictive claim about it of any kind. Proceeding from that disclaimer, I feel the dream is showing Trump to be an unwitting part of a renovation process. The renovation will seem chaotic and be messy, but intelligent forces of self-regulation are at work and will eventually clean up the mess. I had a somewhat parallel dream about George W. Bush when he was president, and I was at the peak of my antipathy toward him. In the dream, W. was in a humbling workman role, cleaning toilets. The implication seemed to be that some process was using him to do messy, unenviable work, and that he was dutifully playing his part. On the other hand, very early after Putin's rise to power, this was many years ago when we knew so much less about him, and I mentioned this before, of course, I had a terrifying and traumatic nightmare about him, and that was what I wrote about that in the article, Twin Horsemen of the Trumpocalypse. Unlike Trump, he seems like the personification of psychopathic Antichrist energy. The dream reinforces my sense that Donald Trump is no more and no less than an eruption of the collective unconscious, an avatar generated by a psychoid matrix. And, you can see my other articles that get into that theme that you've already read, I guess. Just yesterday, I learned of another major... Okay, well, that was the one we talked about from Snopes and Walter Trump. I discussed the subject of Trump as Matrix character in a trilogue with Daniel Pinchbeck and London-based author-researcher Anthony Peake. The podcast was just released yesterday when that article was written. It was the third episode in Daniel's new How Soon Is Now podcast series, which you can download and or subscribe to free on iTunes. And we'll be recording a second Peake Pinchbeck Zap trilogue later today. Listening to the first two episodes of this podcast, and by the way, because obviously we then did record that, and I talked about some of what I felt about the inaugural. One thing I'll mention that I didn't write about here that was, to me, was my most striking memory of the inaugural. If you remember, this was still when Trump was had a very brief honeymoon with Obama after meeting with him in the Oval Office, if you remember, and he had some even good things to say about him, and they showed up with some Tiffany box, a present of some sort for the Obamas and so forth, and Trump, always so classy, so professional, and Michelle, had their best game face on and were being charming and smiling and making small talk with the Trumps. And they kept up that perfect facade throughout, a whole morning and the inauguration and everything. But then there's this incredible moment where, and it's that traditional moment where the departing president is going to take off in Marine One and get their last flight on Air Force One to wherever is the jumping off point for their retirement. And there's just this one time slowing moment where the Obamas are poised at the top of the steps of the Capitol and are looking down at Marine One, and Michelle drops the facade without saying or doing anything, but with her 1,000-yard stare with total telepathic eloquence is so obviously saying, "Oh my God, America, what have you done?" If you can find a videotape of the inaugural where you can find that, you should really watch it. It's pretty amazing. Anyway, so we discussed that in the trialogue, part 2, and I just was mentioning, listening to the first 2 episodes of this podcast series, which I had no part in, was an inspiring and encouraging experience I've long been hoping for. Intelligent people challenging each other to look unflinchingly into what is happening on the deepest level of our world and to find life-affirming ways to work with the global transformation. The podcast is related to Daniel's book entitled How Soon Is Now? From Personal Initiation to Global Transformation. And it's what I've read of the book has been great. And the title of it brings to mind the loosely translated and paraphrased but eternally relevant maxim of the rabbinic sage Hillel the Elder: if not now, when? If not me, who? If not Trump, you. The meaning that I am currently drawing from this dream does not imply that all will be well and that we can merely stand by and let the process unfold. The helpful forces of the unconscious usually work through us. Part of the self-regulatory process will no doubt be activists doing things they feel called to do, just as I plan to work as hard as I can to do the things that I feel called to do. Trump will soon have the title president. I remember John Oliver saying, the phrase Donald Trump, he on many shows he says it has just something wrong about it, like horse pope, it's just words that just don't seem to I find myself gagging when I try and say it. But President Trump is not in charge of, in control of, or even remotely able to comprehend the larger process underway. For better or worse, you already have a president, and that is your own executive function, as psychologists and neurologists call it. If you are able to read this article, then you have a functioning, waking ego consciousness, able to make choices and carry out actions, an executive function, in other words. Regardless of whether Abe Lincoln, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, Kanye West, or a broken Teletubby is in the Oval Office, your position in life, while you still have your faculties, is unchanged. You're in a phenomenal world of shifting conditions and should use your executive function to do the best you can under the current circumstances. That is your eternal inauguration. If not Trump, you. If not now, when? As my friend, the late visionary poet Jack Savage, who died tragically young, you can find his visionary poems on my website, put it, I'll be my own priest and my own doctor, my own king. No one else shall be my king. The king's authority has been restored. All right. So that might have been my last most really thoughtful or sober article on the Trumpocalypse. The next one is a smaller one. It's called Trump, a black swan hatched from the sulfurous corpse of Roy Cohn. The Washington Post just published an excellent overview of what Trump's false wiretapping claims mean. They also discussed the extreme irony of Trump's tweeted accusation that Obama, remember when Trump said that Obama was wiretapping him, and Trump said that Obama was engaging in McCarthyism. What's ironic is that it was McCarthy's notorious predatory lawyer, Roy Cohn, who mentored Trump and taught him, and was his lawyer, and taught him his blunt way of bullying. A counterfactuating, counterpunching, flooding the zone with bullshit, never apologizing, distracting from a vulnerability with an outrageous claim way of making your way in the world. In the New York tabloid verse, Trump felt like a Norse god wielding his cone hammer. But as they say, if your only tool is a hammer, the whole world looks like nails. And now Trump, his Norse godhood affirmed by Electoral College and the trumpeting of sycophants, strides across a world that sparkles with shiny new nails as far as his cyclopean vision can see. He wields his cone hammer more confidently than ever before, landing tweets that reverberate throughout the world. What Trump doesn't know yet, but will soon discover, is that he has stepped into a sphere of power where the rules of physics are not quite the same as they were in the tabloid verse. In this sphere, for every blunt force action, there is an exponentially greater and more varied array of reactions. You hit one nail and it sprouts into an encircling forest of razor wire. You hit another and recusals, resignations, and congressional investigations sprout forth all around you. Trump is like a grade school bully, well-worn hammer grasped in tiny hands, showing up to a four-dimensional chess match with nuclear stakes. But these are just metaphors and similes. In actuality, Trump is a giant twittering black swan on steroids and airplane glue, thudding into a crackle glass citadel riddled with an infinite complexity of razor-sharp fracture planes. Okay, very related to that last one, is one I wrote during a 4-month road trip I took around the country last summer. See my photo albums that had Trumpocalypse in them. They're up on Facebook. And this one is called Trump's Third Rail, Forgetting that the American Psyche has more than one subpersonality. When people, we heard this about when people asked Young about Hitler. And this is what is so embarrassing about Trump. He is a large part of the American psyche, belligerently anti-intellectual, anti-fact, pseudo-macho, claiming to be a victim while a member of many privileged groups, scapegoating, ego-inflated, tuned into high school sex and power games, who's hot, who's not, who's got the highest ratings, winning as an end in itself, unable to own his own shadow, desperately in need of narcissistic supply to bolster an inflated and fragile ego identity, a never apologizing, take no prisoners, all confident in your face bullshit artist bluster, a classically American super salesman style of inferior masculinity confused with actual strength, competence, and leadership that could deliver on classic American can-do optimism. Guess I should have reread that sentence before I tried to read it out loud, since it's been 7 months. Donald Trump is the personification of angry white guy AM talk show rants, Cool Ranch Doritos, big gulp-sized Mountain Dew, pharmaceutical ads that promise salvation to a feel-good soundtrack with the ignored fact litany of fatal side effects playing in the background. It is the American psyche, or at least a substantial enough minority of it to have an electoral college win, that decided to swallow the big orange sugary poison pill it was sure would cure real ills while delivering only on the ignored side effects. It is psyche that is the real third rail of politics, the underground high-voltage labyrinth that sends such rude beasts slouching toward electoral college wins and consequences that can range from sugar coma hangover and Cool Ranch Dorito breath to fatal side effects. But the American psyche is not just all killer clown shadows. There are other layers, such as puritanical, fact-rigorous superegos attached to the rule of law and the protocols of the deep state. And you guessed it, I'm talking about the appointment of former FBI Director Mueller as special counsel, the acting out and you can almost see him in, as the puritanical judge of this American high school bully, American subpersonality, and who's about to get called to the principal's office in confrontation with the reality that the American psyche is complex and that he is not the only subpersonality capable of dominance. So, let's hope that that actually plays out and works. So then I took about 7 months off from writing about Trump, and because it's exhausting and because you don't feel like you're learning anything. That's why Thomas Friedman described Trump as a brain-eating disease. Like you can, once you've reached certain basic conclusions about him, you can keep thinking about him and you're just not learning anything. But I did write something just this last few days about Trump's cognitive decline, because this is something that lots of people are noticing and I think explains a lot of what's going on with him. Now, Trump was never Cicero, but if you listen to him in the 80s and 90s, he could put together complex sentences with subordinate clauses and not lose his train of thought. He spoke in complete sentences and paragraphs. For example, here he is on the Larry King Show in 1987.
Well, I think it's a very good question, and I'd like to. The problem that you have, and you have a major problem, the problem that you have is it's such a big dilemma. You really need federal government assistance, not even city government. The city governments have to be competent, capable, etc. But you really need the federal government to step in. That's why it bothers me so much that when we give this kind of money to the wealthiest countries in the world, and yet for our own people, the homeless, the sick, the poor, the farmers, who are really going through hell right now, those people we're not helping.
Okay, so I should have played the question that preceded that, which was from a phone-in person. But notice all like the comma splices in there where he's putting in all these like subordinate clauses without losing the sentence. And that definitely is something that it takes a definite intelligence and is somebody who sounds like an articulate person used to speaking in front of media without rambling. Here's a Donald Trump interview with Charlie Rose from 1992.
I will say this, Ross Perot, he made some monumental mistakes. Had he not dropped out of the election, had he not made the gaffes about, the watchdogs and the guard dogs and everybody coming at the house, and, 3 or 4, if he didn't have 3 or 4 bad days, and they were real bad days, he could have conceivably won this crazy election.
You'll get some.
Okay, so notice again, he sets up a complex sentence with multiple subordinate clauses, spliced in with pauses, the equivalent of commas, and keeps the whole thread of the sentence together. And now, let's take a look at what he sounds like more recently. Okay, this is from February 16th of 2017, and it's Trump's incoherent ramble on Russia and nuclear.
I guess one of the reasons I'm here today is to tell you the whole Russian thing, that's a ruse. It's a ruse. And by the way, it would be great if we could get along with Russia, just so you understand that. Now, tomorrow you'll say, Donald Trump wants to get along with Russia. This is terrible. It's not terrible. It's good. We had Hillary Clinton try and do a reset. We had Hillary Clinton give Russia 20% of the uranium in our country. You know what uranium is, right? It's a thing called nuclear weapons and other things. Like lots of things are done with uranium, including some bad...
Okay, I just paused it there for a second because I wanted to point out this thing about things. This is a sign of somebody who's losing their ability to call up words when they start having to use these placeholder things to refer to multiple proper nouns. And he defines uranium as nuclear weapons and stuff. Let me go back and replay that so you can see what I'm talking about here.
Nobody talks about that. I didn't do anything for Russia. I've done nothing for Russia. Hillary Clinton gave him 20% of our uranium. Hillary Clinton did a reset, remember, with the stupid plastic button that made us all look like a bunch of jerks? Here, take a look. He looked at her like, what the hell is she doing with that cheap plastic button? Hillary Clinton, that was a reset. Remember it said reset? Now, if I do that, I'm a bad guy. If we could get along with Russia, that's a positive thing. We have a very talented man, Rex Tillerson, who's going to be meeting with them shortly. And I told him, I said, I know politically it's probably not good for me. Hey, the greatest thing I could do is shoot that ship that's 30 miles offshore right out of the water. Everyone in this country is going to say, oh, it's so great. That's not great. That's not great. I would love to be able to get along with Russia.
Okay, I guess I missed that one.
The greatest thing I
can go back and find that. But I mean, you can just see how completely incoherent.
20% of the uranium in our country. Now, tomorrow you'll say, Donald Trump wants to get along with Russia. This is terrible. It's not terrible. It's good. We had Hillary Clinton try and do a reset. We had Hillary Clinton give Russia 20% of the uranium in our country. You know what uranium is, right? It's a thing called nuclear weapons and other things. Like lots of things are done with uranium, including some...
You know what uranium is, right? It's called nuclear weapons. It's like things, like other things, and so forth. Let's see. I mean, and there's some... You've heard the examples yourself if you watch television, which a lot of you may not. And in many cases, what he says is also like unbelievably self-incriminating. I mean, and Trump has been working with lawyers and employing lawyers for his whole adult life, and yet he will say these things that are just a disaster for anybody with like the slightest sense of the legal context. Here's Trump explaining the firing of James Comey.
When I did this now, I said, I probably, maybe will confuse people. Maybe I'll expand that, I'll lengthen the time because it should be over with. It should, in my opinion, should have been over with a long time ago.
Well, and that was an example of incoherence. Remember later in that interview, that's when he said that he fired Comey because of Russia. When they were trying to build this elaborate counter story that it was because of how he handled the Clinton investigation, and that's when he had the deputy attorney general write this report and all that kind of stuff. But he just gave that all away, and something that will no doubt come back to haunt him because it's such a perfect piece of evidence of his obstruction of justice. So that's just a couple of audio samples you won't find on the written article, but here is Trump's cognitive decline. And Trump shows clear signs of cognitive decline. There are many ways to view what's going on with the Trumpocalypse, but one that has a great deal of corroborating evidence is that Trump is suffering from a form of moderate cognitive impairment that is almost to be expected in a 71-year-old man with his extremely unhealthy lifestyle. Many people have observed the dramatic decline in his vocabulary, attention span, and ability to organize his thoughts when he speaks. If you compare Trump's sophisticated vocabulary and ability to speak in coherent sentences and paragraphs during interviews in the 80s to the low vocab, stream of consciousness rambles of today, it's obvious that there is a dramatic decline in his cognitive function. Whatever deal-making abilities Trump might once have possessed, the man we see today is chronically incapable of adhering to long-term strategies without sabotaging them with emotional outbursts and impulsive tweets that are so often disastrous to his agenda, legal position, etc. Many key neurological functions are inhibitory, and in early-stage dementia, people commonly lose their sense of diplomacy and both the judgment and the self-restraint to keep themselves from reacting with foolish words and other actions when they are emotionally agitated and feel a loss of control. An upcoming book favorable to Donald Trump by Corey Lewandowski and David N. Bossie, President Trump's former campaign manager and former deputy campaign manager, has some startling revelations about Trump's junk food habits. According to an article in Fox News, quote, the book further claims that Trump's preferred McDonald's order on the campaign trail was 2 Big Macs, 2 Filet-O-Fish, and a chocolate malted, a meal that contains 2,400 calories, assuming the malted refers to a small McDonald's chocolate shake. The New York Times reported a couple of days ago that Trump typically consumes a dozen cans of Diet Coke daily. As a CNN article on Trump's Diet Coke habit points out, even a 1-can-a-day diet soda habit increases your odds of dementia 3 times, 300%. Trump is marinating his brain with massive quantities of the known neurotoxin aspartame. Given his additional risk factors, the stress he lives with, his obesity, and complete lack of exercise, it would almost be surprising if he weren't suffering from cognitive decline at his age. Trump is our oldest president at time of inauguration. Number 2, Ronald Reagan showed clear signs of cognitive decline by his second term. A psychiatrist I heard interviewed believed that Trump has low-grade psychosis. People often think psychosis means massive hallucinations, etc., but actually it's on a spectrum and can involve milder forms of weakened reality testing. This psychiatrist believes that in many or most cases, Trump is not consciously lying to manipulate the populace, but is creating alternate facts to bolster his fragile and highly inflated ego identity. As Trump deteriorates, he compensates with counterfactual ideation, e.g. that he was one of the greatest memories in history, that it's not his voice on the Access Hollywood tape, that he won by a landslide, etc. Trump's daily barrage of false claims may not be the spin and propagandistic manipulation many of us assumed, but products of a narcissistically disordered personality in cognitive decline, desperately trying to maintain its ego self-image. Romantic relationships and other voluntary human alliances inevitably reflect the psychological state of those who choose to partake in them. Although Trump lost the popular vote, a substantial minority of Americans voluntarily elected to make Trump their leader. And then I repeat that same thing that Jung said about, Hitler didn't manipulate the German psyche, he was the German psyche. I'm not suggesting any equivalence between Trump and Hitler. My point is that people choose to elevate people who reflect their psyches. Although there are top-down causative factors, like Russian operators manipulating social media, the Trumpocalypse is also a bottom-up phenomenon, a collective choosing the leader who best personifies their mass psychosis. Similarly, and mass psychoses are quite common. Similarly, a substantial demographic in Alabama chose Roy Moore to personify their shadow mass psychosis, etc. Jung successfully predicted that someone like Hitler would emerge based on what he saw in the collective German psyche. Many of Jung's educated German patients during the era of the Weimar Republic were dreaming about Wotan, a Germanic god of war and mayhem. It was such a striking phenomenon that Jung called it Wotanism. Jung once met Hitler, and his impression was that he was shaking hands with a psychic scarecrow. This seems strangely parallel to my impression of Trump as a visual self-caricature, a scarecrow with a sagging pumpkin head erupting with straw. Mass psychosis is a common phenomenon. Long before the Trumpocalypse, got all my favorite quotes here, history is a nightmare from which I'm trying to awaken. Trump is the personification of yet another mass psychosis. A substantial U.S. demographic is cognitively impaired, with or without neurological issues. Many Americans are poisoned by a diet of food-like substances and, McDonald's meals and aspartame-laced beverages and so forth. But they're also poisoned by factually deficient news-like substances. A substantial part of the population shares Trump's wounded and resentful narcissism, racial animus, and anger at all the groups demanding power that they assumed was their exclusive entitlement. Inside of Trump is a desperately overcompensating wounded child, and given how many people have wounded children inside of them, it's easy to see how a significant part of the population can identify with him. Trump's cognitive decline, loss of sophistication with thought and speech, uncontrolled rage, etc., only enhance his ability to channel their feelings and low-info worldview. Trump is the personification of a form of consciousness that inevitably deteriorates, as it is not geared toward growth and adaptation, but constriction and rigidification. Build the wall, repression of the other, lock her up, and doubling down on old biases and failed strategies, like trickle down. It's a form of consciousness disastrously maladaptive to a world of accelerating change because its real agenda is trying to restore a wounded ego identity stressed out by change. Make America great again really means, I'm weak, help me to feel great again. And in my first article on Trump, published 2 years ago, I reported on the amazing Freudian slip Trump made during a Meet the Press interview with Chuck Todd, in which he said, you've heard this, of course, but I'll repeat it, I really have no opinion. I just know that I'm weak, that I'm winning by a lot. I really have no opinion, but I know that I'm winning by a lot. And you get that perseverating thing, that it's called perseveration, you get in people with low-grade dementia, where they repeat themselves a lot. It's like very characteristic of older folks. You will hear him catch himself a moment in which he is clearly startled when he realizes that he said weak, and then he overcompensates as usual with another of his written winner phrases, which he repeats a moment later. And I didn't mention that here, but just a few days ago he was supposed to be talking up the tax bill, and somebody wrote in the speech, not understanding Trump's psychology, that it would be like rocket fuel to the economy. And so he just stops and goes like, it'll be like rocket fuel to the economy. And then he goes, rocket fuel, rocket man, little rocket man, what a sick puppy. So he just, there's like this pinball machine going off in his mind where his attention is just bouncing from one thing to another. I mean, and that's why we found out that they can't even tell him about Russian stuff because it'll get him too upset in intelligence briefings. So they just put it in the written material, the written briefing that they know he won't read. He will only listen to people and wants them to use a lot of visual graphics to keep his short attention span occupied. And that's why we learned from the New York Times recently that he watches 48 hours of television a day. The defeat of Roy Moore is the latest of a series of events which even Trump has to recognize as losses. Given that his whole ego identity is built on his being the winner, the counter-punching, trump card-holding victor, triumphing over a succession of adversaries, we can expect a further destabilizing of his personality as losses pile up. And in fact, in the recent Times article, he told staffers when he first took office that this is going to be like a reality show, and like every day will be a new episode in which he will be triumphing over a new enemy. My hope is that his physical decline will cause him to become more passive. The recent New York Times article on Trump's battle for self-preservation reported an encouraging sign of this possibility. Referring to Trump's relationship with his chief of staff, former General John Kelly, they wrote, despite chafing at the limits that John Kelly sets, in other words, as the adult in the daycare center, the president actually craves the approval of Mr. Kelly, people close to Mr. Trump said. And this is encouraging because Trump had an authoritarian father whose approval he craved and who sent him to military schools to discipline him. As president, Trump has surrounded himself with generals. This looks like Trump, unconsciously aware of his own weakness, regressing to his childhood situation and looking for new father figures to impose the discipline he can't manage on his own. This could be a risk-lowering development. The worst-case scenario is Trump becoming so desperate to feel great again that he overrides the trio of father figure generals, his chief of staff, national security advisor, and defense secretary, to impulsively attack his alter ego, Little Rocket Man. I think the odds favor Trump acting out with impulsive tweets, but not being able to overcome the disapproval of this trinity of father figures enough to take any military action solely on his own initiative. Still, our unsettling reality is that two ring of power possessed and deteriorated psyches are wrestling with each other just above the cracks of doom. And that's the last dispatch I have for you right now. There will very likely be more. And, of course, the news of the Trumpocalypse is unfolding before us moment by moment, like a gruesome car accident you can't take your eyes off of, with elements of a clown car mixed in. And stay tuned. I'll have more to say in the future. Thank you so much. This is Zap. This is zaporacle.com, Jonathan Zapp. Also writing for Reality Sandwich.